The rusty cage slammed against the wall and someone howled in the darkness. Shin Do Gyeong opened his eyes and saw nothing. Complete darkness. His body slammed against the iron bars with every downward jerk of the elevator. Someone else's body. Thin, young, its fingers clenched the hilt of a blunt short sword, and a copper tag with the number 7742 burned into it dangled from its neck. The cage was falling. Not descending, it was falling. The cable screeched somewhere above, and with every passing second the sound grew fainter. Someone nearby was praying. Someone nearby was wetting themselves. The air smelled of wet stone and rust, and something sweet like rotting flesh. Do Gyeong clung to a bar and began to count. 1 second, 2, 3. On the fourth, the cage struck again, and the man on the left shoulder cracked against the wall. On the 7th second, there was a rumble below. On the 9th, the cage slammed into the bottom with a sound like a bell shattering. The torches on the walls flickered and went out, and in the darkness, something large began to breathe, 4 meters to the right. The ceiling is high, judging by the echo. Humidity is close to 90. There's no ventilation, or it's one way. The sword in his hand is blunt, but it'll do as a lever. Gyeong stood up. He wiped the blood from his eyebrow with his sleeve and did what he always did at every new position. He began counting his steps to the wall, 3 steps straight ahead, the wall wet stone. His fingers ran along the surface and felt a crack, an old one, a deep one. The rock here was layered, shale or something similar. He turned around and took 4 steps in the other direction. The wall was closer. The corridor narrowed to the left. Breathing on the right grew louder. Something was moving, something heavy. The grain beneath his feet trembled slightly with every step the creature took. Of the 9 people in the cell, 3 were standing. 1 was whimpering in the corner. 2 lay motionless. 3 others were trying to get up. Do Gyeong gripped his sword in a reverse grip and pressed his back against the wall. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know why this body wasn't his own. He didn't know what kind of creature was breathing 4 meters away. But he knew one thing for sure. The ceiling above them was cracking. The rock was damp. The supports had long since rotted away. If that creature hit the wall or started thrashing about, it would bury them all in a minute. So he had to kill it quietly and quickly, or at least lure it out of this corridor. He picked up a fist-sized rock from the floor and threw it to the left. The rock hit the wall and rolled away. The creature froze. Then it turned toward the sound. Heavy footsteps moved to the left. Do Gyeong moved after it, along the wall, a sword in his right hand, fingers on the stone with his left. Count the cracks, count the footsteps, count the seconds between this thing's breaths. 3 seconds, large lungs, massive body, walks on 2 legs, flat footsteps mean wide feet, not a predator, a miner. The word surfaced from a memory that wasn't his own. An orc miner, a dweller of the lower levels, feeds on mushrooms and meat. Poor eyesight. Hearing is excellent. Strength is sufficient to break stone with bare hands. Do Gyeong paused. The memories of the body's former owner came back in fragments. A demoted officer, lieutenant of the 4th Border Cohort, accused of losing an Imperial supply convoy framed by someone from headquarters. The trial lasted 2 days. The verdict took 15 seconds. The depths, life imprisonment. The average life expectancy in the depths is 18 days. Do Gyeong exhaled through his nose and focused on what mattered right now. The orc stopped 6 paces away. He had found a rock and was now sniffing it. Do Gyeong grabbed the sword with a straight grip. The blade was dull, but the tip was still intact. If he struck the orc's neck the side between the vertebrae, the beast would go down. If he missed, the beast would spin around and, with a single blow, snap his ribs along with his spine. Do Gyeong took a step, quietly, another step. The orc raised its head, sniffed, spun around. Do Gyeong struck, not at the neck, in the eye. The tip of the sword went in as far as it would go, and the orc jerked backward. He howled, he swung his arm, and Do Gyeong was sent flying toward the wall. The blow landed on his shoulder, and his left arm went numb instantly. The orc staggered. The sword was sticking out of his eye socket. Do Gyeong slid to the floor and rolled to the right. The orc swung his fist where Do Gyeong had been a second ago. The stone beneath the fist split open. Do Gyeong crept up from behind. He grabbed the sword hilt with both hands. His left hand wouldn't obey him, but he squeezed anyway, and he twisted it. The orc gasped. His knees buckled. 400 kilograms of flesh and muscle crashed to the floor, and the ground shook. Do Gyeong pulled the sword out and fell to his knees next to the corpse. He was breathing heavily. His shoulder was on fire. The fingers on his left hand could barely move. He sat like that for about 30 seconds. Then something happened that he hadn't expected. The orc's corpse began to glow, dimly, greenish, like a phosphorescent mark on a dashboard. The glow gathered into a point on the orc's chest and then spread back across his body. His muscles twitched, his bones cracked. Do Gyeong crawled backward and raised his sword, but the orc didn't stand up. Instead, his body began to reshape itself. The wound on his eye closed up. The body became slightly smaller, slightly denser. Its movements became smoother. And then the orc opened its eyes. Both of them, intact, yellow with vertical pupils, and it looked at Do Gyeong. Not with rage, not with hunger, with anticipation. Something clicked in Do Gyeong's head, as if an iron ledger had opened. Lines of text appeared right before his eyes. Not a glowing screen, not a magical interface, a plain metal plaque with embossed letters. Registry, Unit 001. Type, Orc Miner. Status, active. Full obedience, awaiting assignment. Do Gyeong blinked. The plate didn't disappear. He blinked again. The plate became hazy as if shrouded in fog, but remained. The orc sat on the floor in front of him and waited. Just waited. Do Gyeong looked at him for a long second. Then he looked at the wall behind him, then back at the orc. Then he pulled a piece of chalk out of his pocket. He didn't know where the chalk had come from in the condemned man's pocket. Maybe the body's former owner had been meticulous. Maybe he was just lucky. He walked over to the wall and began to draw. A line to the right, a line down, a square, a corridor, the spot where the cage would fall, the direction of the draft, 3 cracks in the ceiling that he'd felt along the way, 2 vertical ones and 1 horizontal one between them, a classic collapse pattern. If the pressure from above increases or someone starts chipping away at the wall 30 meters from here, this section will collapse within a day. The orc walked over and looked at the drawing. Do Gyeong pointed his finger at 3 crosses on the diagram. Then he looked the orc in the eye. Your name is Un. It means cloud. You're my first foreman. The task is simple. The ceiling will crack right here, here, and here. The collapse will happen no later than in a day. Find the other orcs. We won't harm them. Tell them that the right tunnel is safe. Tell them this is an order from an officer who can read stone. The orc blinked, then he nodded. Slowly and with difficulty, but he nodded, and he walked off into the darkness. Gyeong was left alone by the wall, chalk in hand. His shoulder ached, his fingers trembled. The copper token around his neck chilled his skin. He looked at the diagram Hidui had drawn, then at the tally in his head. 1 unit, 1 orc, 1 piece of chalk. 1 day to live, if he was lucky. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for 5 seconds. Then he opened them and walked back toward the cage. People were still there. 7 people, 3 of whom were wounded. They needed water. They needed light. They needed someone to tell them what to do. Do Gyeong reached the cage in 14 steps. He found the nearest living person by the sound of his breathing. A man. A young, breathing heavily. His left leg was twisted. Do Gyeong crouched down beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. You're alive. That's good. Don't move your leg. I'll stabilize it. He tore a strip of fabric from the hem his robe and tied the man's leg to a piece of iron bar from the cage. Not perfect, but it held. The second survivor was sitting against the wall, rocking back and forth. Do Gyeong touched his shoulder. The man flinched, about 50 years old. His eyes were darting around. His pupils were dilated. Shock! Do Gyeong gripped his shoulder tighter. Listen to my voice. We're downstairs. We're alive. We're not staying here. I need you to stand up and walk to the right, along the wall. 20 steps from there, there'll be a widening. Sit down there and wait. The man blinked. Then he nodded and stood up. The third survivor was a woman, young, about 25. Short hair, a cut above her eyebrow, but she was standing on her own 2 feet and breathing steadily. Do Gyeong looked at her. She looked back at him. You're hurt. She shook her head. Just a scrape. Do Gyeong nodded. Help me carry this guy over to the wall. She nodded silently and took the wounded man by the arm. They dragged him into the widening of the corridor. They laid him against the wall. Do Gyeong checked the other 4 from the cage. 2 were dead. One had broken his neck on impact. The second had apparently died upstairs from fear. His heart couldn't take it. The other 2 were alive but unconscious. Do Gyeong dragged them over to the others. 6 alive, 2 corpses. 1 orc foreman in the darkness, and 1 former engineer in a foreign body with a copper token around his neck. That was all he had. He sat down against the wall and began to think. Water, the first task. The humidity here is high, which means there's water. Most likely there's condensation on the walls further down the corridor. If he could find a recess in the stone or chisel out a niche, he could collect it. 1.5 liters a day, if he's lucky. Not enough for 6 people, but it'll be enough for the first day. Light, the second challenge. The torches had gone out, but he saw the mounts on the walls. If he could find something flammable and strike a spark from the stone, he could light them. Mushrooms. The memory of his former body told him that pale mushrooms, little lanterns, they glow faintly. See, so they don't burn. They actually glow bioluminescence. Like, if he gathered enough and hung them on the walls, he could get dim but steady lighting. Food. The third task, the mind's ration, is simple. 10 mana crystals a day, and you get a bowl of soup. If you fail to meet the quota, you become the soup yourself. But the overseers hand out food during the shift change at the top of the first level. And they're down here now. So until the shift change, we'll have to make do with whatever we can find. Mushrooms, lichen, maybe some rats. Do Gyeong got up and went to look for water. He found it 40 steps away, a crack in the wall, and a thin trickle was seeping out of it. He cupped his hands and scooped up a handful. He tasted it. It had a mineral taste, but it was drinkable. Not poison. He returned and gave water first to the wounded young man, then to the old man, then to the woman. Then he drank some yourself, just a little. Exactly enough to keep your mind working. Do Gyeong took out some chalk and began drawing a map on the wall, what he remembered from someone else's memory. The first level of the depths, the main tunnel, the side tunnels, the site where the cage had crashed. The orc miners' nests were usually in the dead-end tunnels on the right. Mushroom glades on the left, water veins below, the overseers above by the only hoist. The map turned out sketchy and incomplete, but it was better than nothing. He drew and thought. The registry in his head flickered like a dim lamp. 1 unit, Orc Un. Where is he now? What is he doing? The display replied curtly. Unit 001 Yun. Location, right side tunnel, 120 meters from the command post. Status, active. Mission, in progress. Do Gyeong smirked. The system worked like a control panel. No levels, no experience, no magical fanfare. Just a report, just a record. He finished drawing the map and turned to his people. The woman with the cut eyebrow was staring at him intently. "You're in the military." It wasn't a question. Do Hyun looked at her. "I was," she nodded. "They'll kill us here by morning." Do Hyun shook his head. "No, they won't." She narrowed her eyes. "Why?" Do Gyeong pointed at the map on the wall. "Because the ceiling will collapse first, but not on us, on those who are standing in the wrong place. In 12 hours, the right side of the main tunnel will cave in. I know this because I can read the cracks. We'll go left. There's a safe section there." She stared at the map for a long time, then at him. "My name is Nam Seo Yeon. I was a corporal at the Samgak garrison." Do Gyeong held out his hand to her. "Shin Do Gyeong, former lieutenant. Now just number 7742. They shook hands. 4 hours had passed since the cage had fallen. Do Gyeong hadn't slept. He'd walked the entire accessible section of the corridor and counted 18 cracks in the ceiling. 6 of them were dangerous. 3 were critical. Time was working against them, but not as quickly as he'd first thought. They had a day, maybe 30 hours. He returned to his men and woke those who were sleeping. "Get up. We'll take the wounded and head left in silence. Don't touch the walls. Don't strike the stone. Take each step softly." They set off. 6 survivors in the dark corridor. Do Gyeong led the way with his sword. Nam Seo-yeon brought up the rear. The wounded boy lay between them on a makeshift stretcher made of iron bars from a cage and strips of cloth. They walked for an hour. They found a widening in the passage, a small cave about 20 meters across with a high ceiling. Here, the rock was different, denser, fewer cracks. Pale lantern mushrooms on the walls gave off a dim greenish light. For the first time in 4 hours, Do Gyeong saw the faces of his people. The old man, the wounded young man, the female foreman, 2 more men who had just regained consciousness. One of them was burly, a laborer or farmer, judging by his hands. The second was skinny, with shifty eyes, a thief or a con artist. Do Gyeong stopped in the middle of the cave and thrust his sword into the ground. Listen, we're at the bottom of the Hwangryong mines. They dumped us here to die. The average life expectancy here is 18 days. I'm not going to die in 18 days. If anyone wants to stay here and wait to be devoured by an orc, that's their right. The rest of you do as I say, not because I'm the boss, but because I'm the only one who can read this stone. Silence. The old man coughed. The skinny one licked his lips. The big one clenched and unclenched his fists. Nam So-yeon stood silently and waited. No one left. Do Gyeong pulled his sword out of the ground. Good. First, the water's over there in that crack by the far wall. Fill up whatever we can. Second, don't touch the mushrooms on the walls. They're our light. Third, we'll sleep in pairs. One person stands guard at the entrance. Rotate every 2 hours. I'll start. He walked to the cave entrance and sat down on a rock. He placed his sword on his lap. The registry flickered in his mind. Un was 150 meters to the north and moving slowly. The mission was proceeding as planned. Do Gyeong closed his eyes. Don't sleep. Think. There would be a cave-in the morning. He knew this as surely as he knew his own weight and height. The ceiling in the right-hand tunnel wouldn't hold. The only question was who would be beneath it when it happened. He opened his eyes and began sketching a new diagram on the floor. Evacuation routes. 3 options, 2 backup plans. He kept sketching until dawn, which, of course, didn't exist here. It was just that, at some point, the mushrooms on the walls grew slightly brighter. Morning in the depths. Un returned 6 hours later. He entered the cave silently and stood before Do Gyeong. His 5 men stared at the 400-kilogram orc as if he were a wall that had come to life. Nam So-yeon reached for her sword. Do Gyeong raised his hand. Hold your ground, that's Un. He's with me. The orc nodded. Then he opened his mouth and uttered his first word. Done. His voice was like stone upon stone, heavy and grating, but the word was clear. Do Gyeong looked at him. How many left the right tunnel? Un raised his hands and spread his fingers. 8. 8 orcs obeyed and left. Do Gyeong nodded. Good. An hour later, the ceiling of the right tunnel collapsed. The rumbling lasted about 20 seconds. The floor shook. The mushrooms on the walls flickered. Dust crept down the corridor. Then it fell silent. Do Gyeong stood up and walked toward the site of the collapse. Nam So-yeon followed him in silence. They reached the rubble 10 minutes later. Tons of rock had completely blocked the right tunnel. 2 foremen, who had spent the night in a side niche, were trapped under the rubble. Do Gyeong knew this from the sounds he'd heard during the night. Footsteps, conversations, the crunch of food. They were 20 meters from the crack and hadn't bothered to look up. Nam So-yeon stood nearby, staring at the rubble. Then she looked at Do Gyeong. You knew they were there. Do Gyeong stared at the rocks. Yes, you could have warned them. Do Gyeong was silent for 3 seconds. I could have. She waited. He turned and walked back. A sack lay on the floor by the rubble. It had apparently been thrown out by the blast wave from the overseer's niche. Inside the sack were 4 bowls, dried meat, a flask of water, and a coil of rope. Do Gyeong picked up the sack and slung it over his shoulder. Then he stopped. Figures were standing by the rubble. 8 orcs. The very same ones. The ones Un had rescued from under the rubble. They stood there, staring at the man who, the night before, had sent them a warning through an unfamiliar orc, at the man who had read the stone. Do Gyeong looked at them, they looked at him, no one moved. Then the first orc, the largest one, bowed his head. Not a bow, not submission, just acknowledgement. You read the stone. We're alive. Do Gyeong nodded. Let's go. We need to find a second water source, and a place to camp farther away from the rubble. He led the way. 9 orcs followed him, 1 orc foreman, 8 savages, 5 humans, and 1 engineer who had been dead just yesterday. Day 1 in the depths. Casualties, 2 overseers buried under the rubble, 2 dead prisoners in the cell, resources, 1 blunt sword, 1 sack of supplies, 1 piece of chalk, 1 orc spear, 8 orc allies, 5 humans, and a mental ledger with a single line. Do Gyeong walked down the dark corridor counting his steps. As always, Do Gyeong set up camp in a cave with lantern mushrooms, not because it was convenient, but because it had 3 exits. 1 main one, 2 secondary ones. Any position must have at least 2 escape routes. He remembered this rule from a life he couldn't name. He just knew it was right. The first day in the cave began with an inventory check. Do Gyeong spread the contents of his bag out on a flat rock and counted them. Dried meat, 4 portions, a flask of water, half a liter, 4 bowls, a coil of rope, 15 meters of coarse twine. Added to this was a blunt sword, a piece of chalk, a copper token numbered 7742, clothes for 6 people, and 9 orcs behind the wall, crouching and waiting for who knows what. Do Gyeong divided up the meat, each got a piece the size as a finger, not much. But this wasn't a meal, it was a down payment, a sign that they fed people here. The old man chewed slowly. The wounded guy swallowed his piece in a second. The skinny one stashed half in his pocket, thinking no one had noticed. Do Gyeong noticed? He didn't say anything. He just took note. The burly man ate in silence, staring at the wall. Nam Seo-yeon finished her portion and approached Do Gyeong. What's next? Do Gyeong pointed to the wall where he'd drawn a map the night before. We need 3 things. Also, a steady source of water, food, and a connection to the upper levels to get access to the relief crew. She nodded. Who's going? Do Gyeong looked at the orcs behind the wall. Them. Nam Seo-yeon narrowed her eyes. Do you trust them? Do Gyeong shook his head. I give them work. That's different. He walked out to the orcs and stopped in front of Un. Un stood up. The orc's head was level with the cave ceiling, 2.5 meters of pure muscle. Green skin, a flat face, yellow eyes, and absolute focus. I need water. Lots of water. Not a trickle from a crack, but a spring. A natural spring or an underground river. Take 2 of them and go down the left tunnel. Water is always down below. If you find it, mark the wall, like this. Do Gyeong drew a cross inside a circle on the wall with chalk. Looked at the mark. He nodded. He turned to the orcs. He pointed at 2 of them. They stood up. The 3 of them disappeared into the darkness, and the sound of their footsteps faded after half a minute. Do Gyeong turned to the remaining 6 orcs. They were looking at him, not hostile, not friendly, but with curiosity, as if trying to figure out what this skinny man was doing and why. Do Gyeong approached the one closest to him. The orc was slightly shorter than Un. His skin was darker. On his right forearm was a scar from an old wound. Do Gyeong pointed to the cave ceiling. See that crack over there? The orc looked up. He nodded. It's not dangerous now, but in a week, it'll become dangerous if we don't reinforce it. I need a log, or a stone block that can be used as a prop. Find one. The orc blinked, then he nodded and left. Do Gyeong worked like this for 2 hours. He gave each orc a task, simple, specific. Find a stone of this size. Bring mushrooms from the far wall, but not all of them, just the large ones. Check the side passage all the way to the end and come back. Mark the spot if you feel a draft. The orcs listened. They nodded. They left. They didn't speak. Wild orcs had no language, but they understood, and they obeyed, not like slaves. Like workers who, for the first time, had received a clear assignment from a man who knew what he was doing. By evening, if you could call it evening, the cave had changed. 2 orcs dragged stone blocks over and placed them under a crack in the ceiling. One found a side passage leading to another, smaller cave. The other brought back an armful of mushrooms. Un returned and silently pointed to the left tunnel. Water. Do Gyeong followed him. After 100 meters, the corridor widened and began to slope downward. Another 50 meters in, Do Gyeong heard a sound, a gurgling sound, an underground stream, not a spring but a real stream, an elbow's width wide, flowing through a stone channel that nature had carved into the rock over thousands of years. The water was clear, cold, odorless. Do Gyeong tasted it. It had a mineral flavor, but a mild one. It was drinkable. He knelt by the stream and stared at the water for a minute. Then he stood up and patted Un on the thigh because he couldn't reach his shoulder. Good work? Un made a sound, something between a snort and a growl. But if Do Gyeong hadn't known better, he would have said the orc was satisfied. They returned to camp. Do Gyeong gathered the men and the orcs, all 14 of them in one cave. There was water, a constant spring, 150 meters away. Tomorrow we'll start building a trough to bring the water closer. The large man spoke for the first time. His name was Taegon, a former stonemason. Convicted of tax evasion. A trough means a channel. The stone here is soft. If you give me a tool, I'll hollow it out in 3 days. Do Gyeong looked at him. A tool. Tae-ji raised his hands. His palms were as wide as shovels, calluses upon calluses, a chisel and a hammer. We can make them out of stone if we don't have iron. Do Gyeong nodded. Bring 2 stones. One flat with a sharp edge, one heavy and rounded. Un nodded and left. He returned 20 minutes later. Taegon took the stones and turned them over in his hands. He tested them against each other. He struck one against the other. The chip came off cleanly. It'll do. Do Gyeong nodded. A skinny man sat in the corner and watched. His name was Beck, a former clerk at a provincial court, convicted for forging documents. Short, cunning, eyes like a rat's. He didn't volunteer to help, didn't offer anything, just sat there and counted. Do Gyeong had seen types like him before. Every unit had its own back, a man who waits for others to do the work and then looks for a way to skim off the top. You can work with them, but you can't leave them behind. The night passed quietly. Do Gyeong was on duty for the first 2 hours, then switched shifts with Nam Seo Yeon. In the morning, he began the second phase, reconnaissance. He took Un and 2 wild orcs and headed east along the main tunnel. He needed to assess the scale of the first level, how many corridors, how many caves, where the monsters' lairs were, where the passages to the second level were, where the elevator connecting the bottom to the surface was. They walked for 2 hours. The main tunnel stretched straight as an arrow, 3 meters wide, 4 meters high. The ceiling was reinforced with wooden beams, but half of them had rotted away. Every 50 meters there were side tunnels. Not had collapsed. Some led off into the darkness. In one of them, Do Gyeong found the body of a prisoner. An old one, dried out. The skin clung to the bones. Clenched in his hand was a piece of crystal the size of a fingernail, a mana crystal, the very one, fuel for imperial magic. Do Gyeong picked up the crystal and turned it between his fingers. It was warm, it pulsed slightly. It was a murky blue. The memory of his former body reminded him. 10 of these crystals a day, and you get a bowl of soup from the overseers. This man had died with a single crystal in his hand. He was 9 short. Do Gyeong put the crystal in his pocket and kept going. After 300 meters, the tunnel opened into a large cave, a truly massive one, 50 meters in diameter. The ceiling was lost in the darkness, and there were people here, prisoners, about 30 of them. They sat in groups of 3 or 4 along the walls, dirty, thin, with empty eyes. Some had rusty tools, pickaxes, crowbars. One held a torch that smoldered and gave off more smoke than light. In the middle of the cave stood a wooden table. A man sat at the table. Large, fat, bald, with a scar running across his entire face. On his belt hung a short sword and a bunch of keys. Above, overseer. No, not exactly. A prisoner who had become a overseer. His memory suggested the word. A foreman from among their own. In the depths, this is common practice. The strongest prisoner is given the right to distribute food and beat those who fail to meet the quota. In return, he doesn't work himself and eats for 3. This foreman looked at Do Gyeong with the orcs and didn't stand up. He just narrowed his eyes. A newcomer with a menagerie. Do Gyeong stopped 10 paces from the table. The orcs stopped behind him. The savages didn't move. Un stood perfectly still. The foreman licked his lips. He'd brought some fine creatures. There's meat on them. Do Gyeong looked at him. Then at the prisoners lining the walls. Then at the table. There was a bowl on the table, full. Porridge with meat. Next to it were 3 more bowls, empty. A sack lay on the floor by the table, pieces of dried meat stuck out of it. The cave's entire ration was on a single table in front of a single man. Do Gyeong looked the foreman in the eye. How many people are in this cave? The foreman grimaced. 32. There used to be 40. 8 had died over the past week. Do Gyeong nodded. How many crystals do you collect per day? The foreman narrowed his eyes. Why do you ask? Do Gyeong didn't answer. He looked at the prisoners, then at the bowls, then at the foreman. Then he turned to Un and said one word. Table. Un stepped forward. The foreman jumped up and reached for his sword. Un didn't wait. With one hand, he lifted the table along with the bowls and the sack. With the other, he grabbed the foreman by the collar and hoisted him off the ground. The foreman jerked. He wheezed. He tried to reach for his sword. Un held him like a rag. Do Gyeong approached. Put him down. Un set the foreman down on the floor. He fell to his knees. His face was crimson. His eyes were wild. Du Gyeong crouched down in front of him. Listen carefully. I'm not going to kill you. That would be a waste of resources. But from now on, food will be distributed equally. Everyone eats the same. You, me, them. Anyone who doesn't agree can go to the right tunnel. It's true it's collapsed, but that's no longer my problem. The foreman spat out blood. You won't last a day, kid. Your own kind will devour you. Du Gyeong stood up. Maybe, but today everyone will eat equally. He turned to the prisoners. 32 pairs of eyes, hungry, frightened, distrustful. Du Gyeong walked over to the sack of food. He untied it. He had counted the pieces of meat. 21. That's not enough for 37 people, including his group. He took out the foreman's knife. He cut each piece in half. That made 42 pieces. 1 for each person and 5 to spare. Then he took the bowl of porridge. He ladled it into the empty bowls using a spoon he found in the sack. 4 bowls for 37 people. Not enough. But everyone got at least 2 mouthfuls. He handed it out himself, to each person personally. He walked up to them, held it out, looked them in the eyes. Some grabbed it and ran off. Some took it slowly. One man took a piece of meat and began to cry. He just stood there and cried, not out of happiness, but because someone had given it to him rather than taken it away. Du Gyeong finished handing out the food and sat down against the wall. The foreman was sitting on the floor in the corner, drilling him with his gaze. Hatred, pure, concentrated. Du Gyeong saw that look. He knew that tonight this man would try to do something. A knife in the back, a rock to the head, or he'd simply slip away and return with those who were stronger. Du Gyeong turned to Un. Un, keep an eye on him. If he leaves the cave, follow him to see where he goes. Don't touch him, just watch him. Un nodded and sat down by the exit, a 400-kilogram orc guarding the only door. You couldn't ask for a better luck. By nightfall, the cave had changed. The prisoners had moved, not because they were told to, but on their own. Closer to the center, closer to each other, closer to Do Gyeong. 2 of them approached and asked if they could help. One was a former carpenter, the other was a former soldier. Do Gyeong gave them tasks. The carpenter was to repair the support beams on the ceiling. The soldier was to organize guard duty at the entrances. The men began to work, not because they were afraid, but because, for the first time in weeks, someone had told them what to do, and it made sense. Do Gyeong sat against the wall, drawing on a stone. A new map, a large one, marking all the caves he'd found, the water sources, the dangerous areas, orc lairs, passages. Nam Seo-yeon sat next to him, silently cleaning the knife she'd found in a sack. Da Gyeong was sketching. On the 3rd day, Do Gyeong went hunting, not for food, for manpower. The roster required new recruits. 37 people were missing from the quota set by Un. They needed working hands. They needed scouts. They needed people who could haul stone and chisel rock, which meant they needed orcs, or something bigger. Do Gyeong took Un and Nam Seo-yeon with him. He left the rest in the cave under Taegon's supervision. The burly stonemason was the only one among the prisoners whom Do Gyeong could trust to watch over the camp for a few hours, not because Taegon was loyal, but because Taegon was simple. He was given a job. He worked. He was told to keep watch. He kept watch. Dushan valued people like that. They made their way down the left tunnel. The memory of his former body told him that the lower levels of the first tier were home to more than just orcs. Stone golems. Slow, dull, but incredibly strong. A single golem could replace 10 men hauling ore. And if the rumors among the veteran prisoners were to be believed, somewhere in the deepest workings lived even larger creatures. Ash demons, the kind even orcs flee from. But the demons were still far away. For now, the golems were the priority. The corridor sloped downward at an angle. The walls grew damp. The mushrooms grew more densely here. Their greenish light provided visibility for about 5 meters. Enough not to trip, not enough to spot an ambush. Walked ahead. His footsteps echoed hollowly off the stone. Nam Seoyeon followed Do Gyeong silently.
With a knife in her hand. 20 minutes later, the passage widened, and they emerged into a mine shaft. An old one, abandoned. The walls were crisscrossed with furrows from pickaxes. On the floor lay fragments of rock and crystals, small ones, the size of a pea, dozens of them. They glowed a dull blue and were embedded in the stone like raisins in dough.
Do Gyeong crouched down and pried one with a knife. It came out easily. Warm, pulsing, a mana crystal. He put it in his pocket and pried out 3 more. Then he stood up and looked around. The tunnel was large, 30 meters long, 10 meters wide. The ceiling was low, 2.5 meters. Stood hunched over. At the far end of the tunnel, something loomed darkly, massive, motionless. Do Gyeong squinted. A stone, but not an ordinary one. Its contours were too even, its surface too smooth, and it looked too much like the figure of a seated person, if that person were 3 meters tall and weighed a metric ton. A stone golem, asleep. Do Gyeong stopped 10 paces away. The golem didn't move. It didn't breathe. It looked like an ordinary chunk of stone. But the memory of his former body told him this wasn't stone. It was a creature. It sleeps until it's disturbed, or until it senses the vibration from pickaxes at work. Then it wakes up and kills everything that moves within a 10-meter radius. Then it falls asleep again, a simple mechanism effective, the perfect guardian of the crystal veins. That's what Do Gyeong thought. He needed this replica, a worker golem, a porter golem, a builder golem. Just one such unit on the roster would solve the problem of hard labor in the camp for months to come. But it's impossible to kill a golem with a blunt sword. It's stone, living stone. The sword without leaving a scratch, so he'll need something else. Do Gyeong crouched down and looked at the golem, then at the ceiling, then at the walls, then back at the golem. Nam Seoyeon stood nearby, waiting. Stood hunched over, waiting as well. Do Gyeong smiled. For the first time in 3 days, the ceiling is low, the rock is soft, the golem is heavy. If you remove the support beneath it, it will fall into the void below. The question is whether that void exists. Do Gyeong lay down on the floor and pressed his ear against the stone. He listened for 30 seconds. Silence. Then a faint rumble, very distant, as if water were flowing somewhere below or air. There is a void, deep, but it's there. Do Gyeong stood up and wiped the dust from his cheek. I need a hole. Here, right under the golem. 2 meters deep, 3 meters wide. You can dig it. Looked at the stone floor, then at his hands, then at the floor again. He nodded. He crouched down and began to dig with his hands. His orcish fingers sank into the soft rock as if it were clay. He tore the stone into chunks and flung them aside. Nam Seoyeon watched with her mouth agape. Do Gyeong kept track of the time. Dug for 40 minutes. The pit turned out uneven, but adequate. 2 meters deep, 3 meters wide. The edges were loose. Do Gyeong inspected the result. Now for the tricky part, waking the golem and getting it to step into the pit. Do Gyeong picked up a rock. He looked at Nam Seoyeon. When he wakes up, we'll have about 5 seconds before he's fully activated. Move toward the exit. Don't run. Go quickly. She nodded and stepped back. Do Gyeong looked at When he stands up, push him into the pit. Once will be enough. Nodded. Do Gyeong threw the stone. It hit the golem in the shoulder. 1 second. Nothing. 2 seconds. A crack ran across the surface. 3 seconds. The golem flinched. 4 seconds. Its eyes opened. Not eyes. Slits in the stone from which a dim orange light poured out. The golem began to rise, slowly, like a mountain that had decided to stand up. Its stone hands braced against the floor. Its stone legs straightened. Do Gyeong stood 5 meters away, motionless. The golem turned its head. It saw him and took a step forward. Straight into the pit, a stone leg plunged into the void and the golem collapsed. A rumble. Dust. The floor shook. The golem fell onto its back in the pit and, carried by momentum, struck the back of its head against the edge. A crack ran down its skull from top to bottom. The orange light in its eyes flickered. The golem began to rise. Do Gyeong leapt into the pit. He landed on the golem's chest. He raised his sword with both hands and struck the crack in the skull. The tip of the blade entered the fissure. Do Gyeong threw his full weight against it. He twisted it. The crack widened. Something crunched. The orange light went out. The golem twitched. Then it froze. Do Gyeong lay on the stone chest, breathing. The sword had broken. The blade remained lodged in the golem's skull. Only the hilt remained in his hand. He flung it aside and closed his eyes. 5 seconds. Then a familiar glow. Greenish, dim. The golem's body began to reorganize itself. The crack in its skull closed. Its size decreased slightly. Its contours became sharper, and its eyes opened, orange, calm, full of anticipation. The registry in his mind updated. Unit 002, type, stone golem, status, active, full obedience, awaiting assignment. Do Gyeong climbed down from the golem and stood at the edge of the pit. He looked down. The golem was looking at him. It waited. Do Gyeong wiped his face with his sleeve. Your name is 22. Why 22? Because that's the number in the registry, accounting for future additions. Do Gyeong believed in planning. The golem blinked. Its stone eyelids creaked. 22. Stand up and climb out of the pit. We need to get back to camp. On the way, pick up those stones by the wall. No, not all of them, just the flat ones. They'll be used to line the water trough. The golem stood up, climbed out, picked up the stones, 50 kilograms each, carried them as if they were empty boxes. The 4 of them walked back. Do Gyeong without his sword, Nam Seo-yeon with a knife. Un in front. 22 in the back with a pile of stones on his shoulders. Nam Seo-yeon walked beside Do Gyeong. You're crazy. Do Gyeong didn't turn around. I'm an engineer. It's almost the same thing. She didn't answer. But the corner of her mouth twitched. They returned to camp, and the cave fell silent. 37 pairs of eyes stared at the 3-meter-tall stone golem, which was neatly stacking flat stones against the wall. The foreman in the corner turned pale. Taegun wiped his hands on his pants and walked over to the golem. He looked at the stones, then at Do Gyeong. Good stones, smooth. They'll work for the gutter. Do Gyeong nodded. 22 will haul the rock. You cut. He carries. Taegon nodded. He looked at the golem. The golem looked back at him. Taegon reached out and patted the golem on the thigh. Tough guy. Do Gyeong almost laughed. Almost. He spent the rest of the day organizing. He put 2 prisoners to work gathering mushrooms, 3 to clear the side passage, 1 on watch by the stream. He put the foreman to work, too, to carry water. The foreman gritted his teeth, but carried it anyway, because Un was sitting at the entrance, watching. In the evening, Do Gyeong gathered everyone together. He stood in the middle of the cave. Behind him were Un and 22. Before him were 37 pairs of eyes. Listen up. Starting tomorrow, we'll work on a schedule. Wake up when I say so. Quit work when I say so. 3 meals a day. Not much, but 3 times a day. Everyone gets an assignment. Those who work get to eat. Those who don't work still get to eat, but they'll be given the worst work the next day. No one hits anyone else. No one takes from another. If there's a problem, come to me. Any questions? Silence. Then the wounded guy raised his hand. His name was Ho Jun, a former courier. His leg hardly hurt at all after it was set. What's your name, Commander? Do Gyeong looked at him. Shin Do Gyeong, former lieutenant, number 7742. Ho Jun nodded. Lieutenant. All right. That was the first time. Do Gyeong didn't show what he was feeling, but something tightened in his throat for half a second. Then it eased. He nodded and walked over to the wall to draw up a plan for tomorrow. That night, the foreman tried to escape. He got up quietly. He crept toward the exit. Un didn't move. The foreman walked around him in a wide arc. He had almost reached the passageway when Un reached out and grabbed him by the ankle. The foreman fell. Un set him back down, like an object. The foreman lay there staring at the ceiling. Then he crawled back to his spot and didn't get up again. Do Gyeong saw everything. He hadn't been sleeping. He'd been pretending. The fourth day began with work. Taegon and 22 were chiseling out a water trough. The stone ground against the chisel. The golem carried away the rock, silently, methodically, like a machine. 3 prisoners were clearing a side passage and found another small cave, dry, with a level floor. Do Gyeong designated it as sleeping quarters number 2. 2 orcs from the wilderness dragged in mushrooms. Lots of them, a whole mountain of them. Pale, glowing, Do Gyeong divided them into 2 piles, one for food, the other for lighting. The edible mushrooms were rinsed in the stream and boiled in a bowl over a fire made from splinters of rotten beams. The result was a watery porridge. It tasted like wet cardboard, but it was hot. And that was what mattered. Hot food in a place where it's always cold and damp isn't a luxury. It's medicine. People ate and warmed themselves. For some, it was their first meal in days. As always, Gyeong ate last. Always last, not to show off. It was a matter of principle. The commander eats when everyone else is full. He remembered this rule without needing an explanation. On the 5th day, Un brought 4 more orcs, wild, hungry, but calm. They came because they had smelled it, not words. Orcs don't convey words. They convey scents, the scent of a safe place, the scent of food, the scent of peace. 4 orcs came on the scent. Do Gyeong gave each one a task. 2 were assigned to carry stones from 22. 2 were assigned to clear debris from the side tunnels. The list in his head showed 2 lines. 22. The rest of the orcs were wild, allies, but not clones. They obeyed because they wanted to, not because they had to. That meant they could leave at any moment. Do Gyeong understood this, and so he treated them the same way he treated people. He gave them work, he fed them, he didn't beat them, he didn't yell at them. On the 6th day, more people arrived. 3 prisoners from a distant work site. They'd heard about a camp where they were fed and not beaten. They came on their own. One of them was just a boy, about 17, skinny, with huge eyes. His hands were covered in calluses. Do Gyeong asked why he'd been sent here. The boy said he'd stolen some bread. Do Gyeong looked at him for a long time. Then he gave him a bowl of mushroom porridge and assigned him light work, collecting crystals in the nearby mines. On the 7th day, 2 things happened. First, Taegon finished the water trough. Water flowed straight into the camp, a thin stream through a stone channel carved into the rock. People stood and watched as the water ran over the stone. Some were silent. Some laughed. A young boy cupped his hands and drank until he coughed. The second event was worse. It was neither orcs nor humans who came to the camp. A blind reaper worm crawled out of a side tunnel, 2 meters long, 1 meter in girth, no eyes, no ears, just a mouth with 3 rings of teeth. It moved by vibration. Every step, every blow of a chisel, every piece of rock that fell to the floor drew it in like a beacon. Un was the first to spot it. He roared. He blocked the entrance. The worm struck, with its head like a battering ram. Un was sent flying against the wall. 300 kilos of living flesh slammed against the rock. Un got to his feet and blocked the passage again. Blood flowed from a gash in his side. The worm struck again. Do Gyeong stood behind Un thinking. Quickly, the worm is blind. It senses vibrations. So if everyone freezes, it will lose its target. But Un can't freeze. He's standing between the worm and the camp. Do Gyeong made his decision in a second. He circled around Un to the left. He picked up a rock and threw it far into the tunnel behind the worm. The rock struck the wall 20 meters away. The worm froze and turned toward the sound. Do Gyeong stepped forward, holding a fragment of an iron rod from the cage in his hand, sharpened by Taegon 3 days earlier, not a sword, not even a knife. It was just a sharp stick, made of rusty iron. Do Gyeong knew where to strike. The memory of his former body and 6 days of observing the species told him so. In reaper worms, the nerve center is located at the base of the head, where the 3 rings of teeth attach to the body, a vulnerable spot. Nit returned a day later. The scout worm crawled silently into the camp and froze at Do Gyeong's feet. A record flashed in his mind. Unit 003. Nit, mission accomplished. Data available. Do Gyeong closed his eyes and saw, not a map, more like a sensation, as if his fingers had felt every stone within a 200-meter radius. Corridors, Caves, dead ends, rubble, nests, water sources, all of this settled in his mind not as lines, but as textures. Soft here, hard here, empty here. Someone's breathing here. Do Gyeong opened his eyes and picked up a piece of chalk, the last fragment, no bigger than a fingernail. He began to transfer his sensations onto the wall. The map turned out crooked but accurate. The first level of the depths turned out to be much larger than he'd thought. 17 main tunnels, 42 side passages, 11 caves suitable for habitation, 3 underground streams, 2 small lakes, 1 large cavity in the center of the level, which Nit marked as a void. But the void pulsed. Something lived inside it. Something large. Nests appeared separately on the map. 4 orc packs, each consisting of 10 to 15 individuals, 2 sleeping golems in the distant tunnels, and 3 reaper worms in the lower tunnels. Nit also found people. 6 groups of prisoners scattered throughout the level, a total of about 100 people. Most were in serious condition. Starvation, wounds, disease, without organization, and without hope. Do Gyeong stood in front of the map and counted 100 people. If he gathered them into a single camp, he'd have to feed 143 mouths a day. There wouldn't be enough mushrooms, nor would there be enough crystals to trade with the overseers for food. We need another source. We need a kitchen. He needed a healer, and he needed to solve the problem of the overseers. He turned to Nam Seo Yeon. How many overseers are on the first level? She thought for a moment. According to the staffing roster, 20. After the collapse, -2, maybe 18, maybe fewer. Some run upstairs if it gets too dangerous. Do Gyeong nodded. Where's the shift change point? Nam Seo Yeon pointed to the map. The central tunnel, where the elevator goes up, the only entrance and exit from the level. The overseers are stationed there constantly. Food comes down from above once every 3 days. The crystals go up via the same lift. Do Gyeong looked at the map. The lift, the only link to the surface. Control the elevator, and you control the level. But taking it by force would draw attention from above, and attention from above means a punitive squad. It's too early for that. First, we need to become strong enough for the punitive squad to matter. He made a different decision. Don't take the elevator, bypass it. Create a self-sufficient supply system that doesn't depend on what comes from above. Food, water, heat, tools, all our own. He started with food. Mushrooms are good, but they aren't a proper meal. He needed protein. In the mine, protein meant rats, or worms, or fish if there were fish in the underground lakes. He sent 2 wild orcs to the nearest small lake with orders to catch anything alive. They returned 4 hours later. One was carrying 3 pale fish, each the size of a palm in his hands. Eyeless, semi-translucent cave fish. Do Gyeong examined the catch. Meat, protein, soft bones, can be cooked, can be eaten. If there are 3 in the lake, that means there are 30. If there are 30, that means we can set up a fishery. He sent 2 more men to the second small lake. They returned with 5 fish and 1 large crayfish, white, blind, with claws like wire cutters. Do Gyeong held the crayfish in his hands and thought, crayfish, that means there's oxygen and organic matter in the water. That means an ecosystem. That means we can do more than just catch them. We can breed them, maybe in a year, in half a year, if we're lucky. He handed the crayfish to Taegon. Don't eat it. Put it in a stone bowl with water. This will be our breeding crayfish. Taegon looked at the crayfish, then at Do Gyeong. He shrugged and carried the crayfish to the stream. Do Gyeong moved on to his second task. People. 100 people scattered across the tier, hungry, sick, dying. If he left them there, half of them would be dead in a week. If he gathered them here, the burden on the camp would quadruple, but if he didn't gather them, he'd lose the laborers he'd need later. An engineering dilemma, spending resources now versus benefits in a month. Gyeong made his decision, gather them, but not all at once. In groups, 10 to 15 people a day, with careful selection. Those who can work go first. Those who are wounded go second. Those on the verge of death go too, but last. Not because their lives are less valuable, but because if the camp can't handle the strain, everyone will die. He sent Un and 4 wild orcs to the nearest group of prisoners. Bring them here. Don't drag them, bring them. Tell them there's water and food and a place where they won't be beaten. If they don't want to come, don't force them. Un nodded and left. Do Gyeong sat down by the wall and began sketching a plan of the camp, not the current one, but the future one, for 150 people. Sleeping quarters, a kitchen, outhouse, storage, guard post, infirmary. He sketched and thought. Infirmary. Without a doctor, it's just a room full of wounded people. He needed someone who knew how to treat them. Among his 43 prisoners, no one had any medical experience. Ho Jun bandaged wounds, but that wasn't treatment. It was just slapping on rags. Do Gyeong wrote on the wall, "We need a doctor." He underlined it. Un returned 6 hours later. 14 people followed him. Or rather, 8 were walking. The orcs were carrying the other 4. 2 were walking on their own but could barely stay on their feet. Do Gyeong met them at the camp entrance. He stood and watched. 14 skeletons covered in skin, sunken eyes, arms like sticks, clothes in tatters. One woman was clutching a child to her chest, a girl of about 3, silent, with huge eyes. Do Gyeong looked at them for 3 seconds. Then he turned away. Nam Seoyeon. Porridge. For everyone. She nodded and went to the kitchen. Do Gyeong personally sat each of the 14 down against the wall. He gave them water. He checked their wounds. 2 were in serious condition. One had a festering wound on his arm. The other had a fever. Do Gyeong washed the arm with water and wrapped it in a clean cloth. He gave the boy with the fever something to drink and laid him down closer to the fire. Then he approached the woman with the child. "What's your name?" She looked at him. Her eyes were dry on the verge of tears. "Young Mi-yeon, a former laundress, convicted for her husband's debts. Her husband died in the mine on the 3rd day. Her daughter was born here, in the dark, on the stone floor." Do Gyeong looked at the girl. The girl looked at him. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling. She was just looking. Do Gyeong reached out and touched her forehead. Cold, but alive. Wee Seo-yeon brought porridge, mushroom porridge, watery, hot. They handed it out. The woman fed her daughter with a spoon in small portions. Slowly. Do Gyeong sat nearby and watched. Then he stood up and walked over to the wall with the map. He finished writing the line, children's ward, next to the infirmary, a dry place, warm, quiet. In the evening, the second group arrived, 11 people. They brought 2 wild orcs that Do Gyeong had sent away that morning. These were in better condition. They could walk. They could work. Among them was a former military cook named Cha Min-soo, short, broad-shouldered, with a red face and hands that had tended 1,000 pots. Do Gyeong looked at him and, for the first time in a week, felt something akin to relief. "You're a cook," Cha Min-soo nodded. 15 years in the army kitchen. Feeding 100 people out of nothing is my specialty." Do Gyeong showed him their supplies. Mushrooms, fish, crayfish, if they could breed them. Water. Nothing else. Cha Min-soo examined the mushrooms. He sniffed them. He tasted one raw. He grimaced. Then he thought for a moment. "If there's salt, I can pickle them. Pickled mushrooms keep longer and are more nutritious. There's salt, mineral water, boil it down, salt crystals on the walls." Du Yong showed him a wall by the stream. White streaks, mineral deposits. Cha Min-soo scraped at it with his finger, licked it, nodded. "Not sodium chloride, but it'll do." In half a day, the cook had set up a kitchen, a real one, with a stone hearth, with stone cauldrons that Taegun had hewn out, with a shelf for supplies, with wooden spoons he'd carved from fragments of beams. The first dinner, from a professional cook, was mushroom soup with fish. The taste was still far from good. 700 meters down the eastern tunnel, Un led the way. Do Gyeong followed him. The corridor here was different, already lower. The walls were made of limestone, not shale. White streaks on the stone. Stalactites on the ceiling. The air was drier, cleaner. Someone had taken care of the ventilation. Du Gyeong noticed it right away. Every 50 meters, there were holes in the ceiling, small, neat. chiseled out not with a pickaxe, but with something thin, a medical instrument perhaps, or a knife. Someone had spent a lot of time here. Someone methodical, patient, someone who knew that air is necessary for life. At the 400-meter mark, Do Gyeong caught a scent. Bitter, pungent, herbal, like a pharmacy or a field hospital. Un stopped and sniffed. He growled softly, not a threat, a warning. Someone was there, and that someone wasn't. Do Gyeong placed his hand on Un's thigh. "Stay here, I'll go alone." Un looked at him, yellow eyes, discontent, but he nodded. Do Gyeong moved forward, a stick in his right hand. His left hand was free, his palm open, a sign of peaceful intentions. After 100 meters, the passage turned and opened into a cave, small, about 10 meters across. The ceiling was low, 2 meters high, but it was dry and clean. Bundles of herbs hung on the walls, pale, thin, subterranean plants. On the floor, a stone slab served as a table. On it lay tools, stone knives, bone needles, strips of cloth rolled into bundles, clay pots containing ointments, a small fire burned against the far wall, not a campfire, an oil lamp in a stone bowl, a wick made from the sinew of some animal. The flame was quiet, steady, and a person was sitting next to the fire, a woman, about 26 years old she appeared to be, short hair, dirty but neatly cut. Her face was thin but not emaciated, her eyes were dark and calm. She held a clay pipe in her hands. She was smoking, in the mine. Where air is worth its weight in gold, she was smoking. Do Gyeong stopped at the entrance. The woman looked at him, took a drag, exhaled the smoke, and said calmly, "If you're here for herbs, it's on the shelf to the left. If you're here for me, I'm not in the mood." Do Gyeong lowered his staff. "I'm not here for herbs, and I'm not here for you. I'm here for help." She narrowed her eyes. "Help? What kind of help?" Do Gyeong stepped into the cave without asking permission. He looked around. Shelves, tools, supplies. This woman had been living here for a long time, months, maybe longer. And she was better organized than his entire camp. "I have 57 men. 4 are seriously wounded. 1 has a festering arm. Another has had a fever for 3 days. There's a 3-year-old child I can't even examine properly. I need a doctor." She took another long drag. She looked at him through the smoke. "Who is it? Shin Do Gyeong, former lieutenant, number 7742, she smirked. "A lieutenant in a mine. It happens." Do Gyeong didn't return her smirk. "You're a doctor." She was silent for 5 seconds. Then she smashed the pipe against a rock. She stood up. She was half a head shorter than him. Thin, but she stood straight, like someone accustomed to standing above those who are lying down. Lee Sua, a former third-rank military medic, stripped of her rank and exiled to the depths for treating enemy prisoners on equal footing with her own. Life sentence. "I've been living here for 8 months. Do Gyeong looked at her. 8 months. The average life expectancy in the depths is 18 days. She had outlived the average by 13 times. She caught his gaze. "I'm not strong. I'm cautious. I found a cave with good ventilation. I grew herbs from spores on the walls. I learned to hide from orcs and worms. I eat mushrooms and lichen. I don't stick my neck out. It's quiet here." Do Gyeong nodded. It was quiet. It won't be any more. "I have a camp 700 meters to the west. Water, a kitchen, security, hot meals 3 times a day, and 57 people who need a doctor." She folded her arms. "Why should I go there? I have everything I need right here." Do Gyeong paused. Then he looked her in the eyes. "Because you treated enemy prisoners just as you would your own. You were exiled for that. But you never stopped being a healer. You've been living alone for 8 months, growing herbs, not for yourself. There are too many herbs for just one person. You're preparing for something, or for someone." She stood motionless. Her expression didn't change. But her hands, which had been crossed over her chest, tightened slightly. Do Gyeong continued. "I have a man with a festering arm. If it isn't treated within the next 2 days, he'll lose his arm or his life. I have a young man with a fever that won't subside. It might be an infection, maybe something worse. I have a 3-year-old girl who was born in the dark and has never seen a doctor. I'm not asking you to live with us. I'm asking you to come and take a look. Just once. If you want to come back here after that, I'll send an orc to escort you back." She was silent for a long time. The phone in her hand was growing cold. The flame in the lamp crackled. Then she turned toward the shelf. She began taking down the jars and packing them into a canvas bag. Methodically, quickly, like someone who had packed that bag 1,000 times. Ointment for festering wounds, a fever-reducing decoction, clean cloth for bandages, bone needles, thread made from sinew. She packed the bag in 3 minutes, slung it over her shoulder, turned to Do Gyeong. "Lead the way." They set off 700 meters back. Sua walked quickly, without looking back. When she saw Un at the turn, she froze for a second. She looked at the orc. Un looked at her. She turned to Do Gyeong. "What's this?" "My foreman, Un." She looked at Un again, then at Do Gyeong. "You have a tamed orc." "Not tamed. A worker." She snorted. She moved on. Un followed. They entered the camp, and Sua stopped. 57 people in a cave lit by mushrooms, stone walls, a water trough, a kitchen with a hearth, sleeping quarters, guards at the entrances, a map on the wall, and a 3-meter-tall stone golem in the corner, neatly stacking stones into a smooth wall. Sua stood and watched. Then she cursed under her breath. Do Gyeong didn't ask what she'd said. He led her over to the wounded man with the festering arm. Sua dropped to her knees. She examined it. She sniffed the wound. Her face turned to stone. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Why hadn't they cleaned it? They had. With water from the stream. She shook her head. Water. Water from a stream in a mine where the walls are full of mineral salts and mold spores. She opened her bag, took out a small pot of ointment. Green, with a pungent smell. She removed the old bandage. Do Gyeong saw the wound and looked away. Not out of... He'd seen worse wounds. But here, his job wasn't to look, but to organize. Sua worked in silence, 20 minutes. She rinsed the wound with her own decoction, applied the ointment, put on a clean bandage, tightly, professionally. Then she moved on to the boy with a fever. She examined him, felt his forehead, his stomach, checked his eyes and throat, made him open his mouth and stick out his tongue. Then she sat down and took out a test tube. Swamp fever. The airborne form, spores from lantern mushrooms. They're harmless on the skin, but if you inhale them constantly in an enclosed space, you'll get a fever in a week, blindness in 2, death in 3. Do Gyeong froze. Mushrooms. The very same mushrooms he'd used to light up the camp. The very same mushrooms he'd hung on the walls so people could see each other. Sua looked at his face. "Don't panic. It's treatable. You need a decoction made from the roots of white lichen. It grows on the walls below 2 meters from the floor. And the mushrooms need to be hung high near the ceiling, not at face level. The spores are heavier than air. They fall downward. If the mushrooms are up high, the spores settle before they reach breathing level." Do Gyeong nodded. He turned around. "Take gone. All the mushrooms on the walls. Up all the way to the ceiling. Now." Dagon nodded and got to work. 22 came over and started helping. The golem reached the ceiling effortlessly. An hour later, all the mushrooms in the camp were hanging from the ceiling. The light grew dimmer but was distributed more evenly, and it became easier to breathe. Do Gyeong felt it right away. He'd been breathing in those spores for a week. Everyone was breathing them in. Su-A went around the entire camp. Everyone. 57 people. She examined them. She felt them. She made them show their tongues and palms. 12 had the early stages of swamp fever. 4 had skin problems from the dampness. 6 had old fractures that had healed crookedly. 1 had a dislocated shoulder that no one had set, and now his arm hung limply. As for the girl Jong Mi-yeon, the daughter, everything was fine. She was healthy, surprisingly healthy for a child born in a mine. Su-ah said that her mother must have been giving her all the food. Do Gyeong looked at Jong Mi-yeon. The woman was sitting against the wall, skinny as a skeleton. Her eyes were sunken. She looked at him and then looked away. Do Gyeong walked over to Cha Min-soo, the cook. "Starting tomorrow, double portions for Jong Mi-yeon, no arguments." Cha Min-soo nodded. "Understood, Commander." That evening, Su-ah sat against the wall, smoking a pipe. Do Gyeong sat down beside her, in silence. She smoked, he thought. 5 minutes of silence. Then Su-ah spoke. "Do you know what you're doing?" Do Gyeong looked at her. "What do you mean?" She took a drag. You're setting up a camp for people in a place where people are supposed to die. You feed them, you treat them, you give them work. You even give the orcs names, but you do realize that the higher-ups will notice this, and when they do, they'll send soldiers, not orcs. Do Gyeong nodded. I know. She looked at him through the smoke. So what then? Do Gyeong stared into the darkness of the corridor. Then I'll figure it out. She smirked. You'll figure it out. He nodded. I'll figure it out. How many soldiers? How many corridors? How many stones in the ceiling? And I'll build a system where it'll be easier for the soldiers to leave than to stay. She took a long drag. Then she exhaled. You're either a genius or a madman. Do Gyeong stood up. It's the difference in the result. She remained seated. She finished smoking her pipe. Then she stood up and walked toward the infirmary, that corner of the cave Do Gyeong had designated as the infirmary. A stone slab, a couple of bowls of water, rags. She stopped in the middle of it all and looked around. Then she cursed under her breath. She turned to Do Gyeong. I need a table, a flat one, made of stone, at waist height. I need light, not mushrooms, fire, a constant flame. I need water, hot water. Not warm hot, I need clean cloth, a lot. And I need a separate cave, small, dry, only for the heavy ones. No mushroom spores, no dust, no nosy people. Do Gyeong listened, then he nodded. 22? A table. Stone, smooth, at this man's waist level. The golem looked at Su-A. He sized her up with his gaze. He nodded. Taegon, a separate cave. The side passage on the left. Clear it out and widen it. Taegon nodded. Ian and lamp oil. Nit found something oily in the lower tunnels. Check it out. Un nodded. Cha Min-su, hot water, constantly. You can heat the stone in the hearth and put it in a stone cauldron with water. Cha Min-su nodded. It's been done before. I know how. Sua stood there listening as her list turned into orders. Then she looked at Do Gyeong. Her eyes had changed, not warmer, not softer, more attentive. You're not just a lieutenant? Do Gyeong turned around. I was. She shook her head. No, you weren't just that. You're something else. I don't understand what yet. Do Gyeong didn't answer. He walked over to the wall. He picked up a piece of chalk. He erased the line that read physician needed. He wrote in its place, Physician Lee Sua, active status. Then he turned and went on his rounds. It was quiet in the camp at night. 58 people were asleep. Sua wasn't sleeping. She was sitting in the future infirmary, sorting through her little pots. She was checking her supplies, counting them. Wound ointment, 6 doses. Not enough for 12 patients. Fever reducer, 4 doses. She'd have to find raw materials. Painkiller. 0, no ingredients, no lab equipment, nothing but stone and mushrooms. She sat there, staring at her hands. The overseer stood there, counting. Do Gyeong could see it in his eyes. Not anger, not fear, arithmetic. 40 crystals now, or 3,000 in a month. 4 people with swords against 2 orcs and a golem in a narrow passageway. Casualties, profit, risk. The overseer was no fool. His name was Kwon, and he'd been working in the depths for 4 years. 4 years meant he was a survivor. Survivors don't jump into a fight without doing the math. Kwon looked at the bag of crystals, then at Do Gyeong, then at the orcs behind him. A month. Do Gyeong nodded. A month. And one more thing, I need tools. Proper ones, pickaxes, crowbars, wedges, ropes, and cloth. Lots of cloth. Kwon narrowed his eyes. This isn't a shop, kid. Do Gyeong pulled 3 mana crystals out of his pocket. Large ones, about the size of a grape. He placed them in his palm. He held them out. This is a down payment. Kwon looked at the crystals. Large stones were worth 3 times as much as small ones. 3 of these were a foreman's monthly salary. He took the crystals. He turned them over in his hand. He tested one with his teeth. They were genuine. Do Gyeong waited. Kwon put the crystals back in his pocket. He looked at the foreman standing nearby, who was turning crimson. Then at Do Gyeong. The tools will be ready in 3 days. Fabric in 5 days. Hand over the crystals every 10 days. 50 of them, not 40. Do Gyeong nodded. 50. Kwon turned away. The foreman lunged toward him and hissed, What are you doing? That pup has taken over my zone, my food, my people. Kwon looked at him. Your territory, your people. You couldn't even hold on to a single orc, and he feeds 60 men and turns in crystals. I need crystals, not your pride. The foreman turned pale. Quan turned and walked down the tunnel back toward the hoist. 2 overseers followed him. The foreman stood alone. He looked at Do Gyeong, hatred, pure hatred. Then he turned and followed after them. Do Gyeong stood at the entrance and watched the torches recede into the distance. Then he turned to Nam Seoyeon. She was standing behind the barricade, clutching a knife. He'll be back, the foreman. Do Gyeong nodded. He'll be back, but not today. And by the time he returns, we'll be too big for it to matter. For the next 3 weeks, Do Gyeong worked. He didn't fight, he didn't wage war, he worked, every day according to schedule. Wake up, breakfast, assignment of tasks, lunch, work, dinner, lights out. The camp was growing. New people arrived every day, 2 at a time, 3 at a time, sometimes 10. Rumors spread through the level faster than feet could carry them. They feed you there. They don't beat you there. They treat you there. There's water and hot soup there. By the end of the 2nd week, there were 90 people in the camp. By the end of the 3rd, 120. Do Gyeong methodically expanded the space. Taegon and 22 were carving out new passages between the caves. Wild orcs hauled away the rock. People cleared the area and set it up. Sleeping quarters for 20 people each appeared. A sewage trench leading to a distant dead-end tunnel. A tool storage room. A kitchen with 2 hearths and an infirmary. Lee Sua's real infirmary. A separate cave. Dry, clean. A stone table at waist height that 22 had carved from a single block. 2 oil lamps in stone bowls. Hot water in a stone cauldron. Shelves lined with jars of ointments. Bundles of herbs on the walls. And the smell. Not the smell of a mine, but of medicine. Bitter, clean, professional. Sua worked 14 hours a day. Without complaint, without breaks, just her pipe and her cursing. She cursed constantly. At patients who didn't wash their hands, at assistants who mixed up the ointments, at Do Bayon, who, in her words, drove people like horses. Yet not a single person in the camp had died of illness since her arrival. 12 cases of swamp fever were cured, a festering arm was saved, a dislocation was set, 4 fractures were broken again and set correctly. These were not quiet procedures. The screams were so loud that the orcs covered their ears, but Sua held the bone and told them to bear with it, and the people endured, because afterward, things were better. It was always better afterward. Do Gyeong was expanding his list, carefully, methodically. Every killing was planned, every one with a purpose. In the 2nd week, he killed 2 more orcs, one for the kitchen. Cha Min-soo needed an assistant who could carry pots of boiling water without getting burned. Orc skin is impervious to heat. The perfect kitchen worker. Do Gyeong named him Un-second, not out of laziness, but because of the system. Un-first was the foreman. Un-second was the cook. The Un-series refers to general-purpose orcs. He killed the 2nd orc for construction work. He named him Bomb, Spring, because this orc was supposed to clear away rubble and open up new caves, just as spring opens up the earth. Yet, in the 3rd week, he killed another golem. That was more difficult. The golem turned out to be larger than the first one. 3.5 meters. A pit wouldn't have worked. Instead, Do Gyeong used a cave-in. He found a section of the ceiling with critical cracks. He lured the golem underneath it. He ordered Un to strike the wall in the right spot. The ceiling collapsed. The golem was buried under tons of rock, not dead but immobilized. Do Gyeong climbed down into the collapse and found the head. A crack in the skull from the impact of a stone slab. He inserted an iron wedge, one of the tools Quan had brought, into the crack, and struck it with a stone. The wedge went in. The golem twitched and went still, aglow. The registry updated. Unit 005, Stone Golem. Designation 41, number in the planning system. Do Gyeong pulled the golem out from under the rubble with the help of 22 and 4 orcs. 2 golems, 5 orc clones, 1 worm. 8 units in the registry, plus 20 wild orcs who came and stayed. Do Gyeong checked on each clone once every 3 days. Personally, he called them by name. He gave them a task. That was the rule of the system. If you skip a day, the copy goes feral. It loses the ability to speak. It reverts to its primal state. He never skipped a day. He kept track in his head, like a duty log. Monday, Tuesday, 22, Wednesday, nit, and so on. There were no days of the week here, but Do Gyeong kept track, with notches on the wall. 1 notch for 1 day. On the 21st notch, what he had been waiting for and fearing happened. The foreman returned, not alone. 12 men came with him, not guards, prisoners, the very ones the foreman had fed before and who were loyal to him, strong, vicious. Armed with sharpened stones and shards of iron, they came at night, through the side passage that Nam Seo-yeon had left unguarded because there weren't enough people. Nit was the first to spot them. The worm was lying in the wall of the side tunnel and sensed the vibration of 12 pairs of feet. The registry flashed in Do Gyeong. Unit 003. Nit. Alarm. Movement heading east. 12 sources. Do Gyeong woke up instantly. His body reacted before his mind did. He jumped up, grabbed a rod. Side passage now. Stood up and darted toward the passage, quickly for a creature weighing 400 kilograms. Nam Seo-yeon woke up right after him. A knife in her. What? Guests. 12. On the right. They'd made it. Stood in the side passage like a wall. The foreman and his men came around the corner and saw a 400-kilogram orc a meter and a half away from them. The first attacker swung a rock. Caught his hand, squeezed, a crunch, a scream. The second one stabbed with the sharp edge. It hit in the side, not deep. His hide is thick. With his free hand, flung him against the wall. The second month began with 2 events. First, Kwon brought the tools, not 3 pickaxes and a coil of rope as he'd promised, but a whole bundle. 6 pickaxes, 4 crowbars, 2 hammers, 10 wedges, 3 coils of rope, a roll of coarse cloth, and wrapped separately in a rag, a knife. A good one, steel, with a wooden handle, not a miner's tool, a combat knife. Do Gyeong looked at the knife, then at Kwon. Kwon shrugged. A bonus for 50 crystals, paid on time. Do Gyeong took the knife. He weighed it in his hand. Good balance. The steel wasn't rusty. Someone up there decided it was worth investing in a man who pays on time. Or whoever someone higher up decided it was worth arming someone who might prove useful in the future. Do Gyeong tucked the knife into his belt. Thanks. Kwon nodded and left. The second event. Nit found a passage to the second level. Not a staircase, not a descent, a sinkhole, a natural crack in the floor of the far tunnel that led down 20 meters and led into the cave system of the second level. Narrow. A human could squeeze through. An orc would struggle. A golem couldn't get through. But it was a way down. And down below, according to Su'a, grew the white moss and cave mint she needed for her medicines. Do Gyeong assembled a group. Himself, Nam Seo-yeon, and one of the newcomers. A former rock climber from a mountainous province named Park Tae-woo, 30 years old, lean and wiry, a man of few words, convicted of poaching. He'd been climbing rocks since childhood. 4 of them for the descent. Nit as their guide. Do Gyeong left the camp in the care of Taegon and Su'a. Taegon to keep order, Su'a for everything else. Before leaving, Su'a caught up with him at the entrance. White moss grows on the walls below 200 meters. It looks like a gray beard. Don't confuse it with gray moss. Gray moss is poisonous. White moss is soft and smells like wet earth. Cave mint is green with purple veins. The leaves are round. The smell is pungent. If you find it, don't pick it. Dig it up by the roots. I need a live plant, not a dried one. Do Gyeong nodded. She looked at him. 3 days. If you don't come back in 3 days, I'll come down myself. Do Gyeong shook his head. No, you're needed here more. She pressed her lips together. She didn't argue, but her eyes said everything that needed to be said. They descended through the opening. Park Tae-woo went first, a rope around his waist, his feet braced against the walls. His hands clung to the ledges. The climber made it down in 10 minutes and shouted that it was safe below. Nam Seo-yeon was second, then Do Gyeong, then The orc struggled to descend. His weight was breaking the ledges. The rope creaked, but Un dug his claws into the rock and slid down the wall like a bear down a tree trunk. Hold! Down below it was different. The air was denser, warmer, more humid. The mushrooms on the walls weren't green, but purple. The light they gave off was brighter. The ceilings were higher. The corridors were wider, and the smell, sweet, heavy, like rotting flowers. Knit slipped forward and froze. The display flashed. Unit 003, knit, data, movement ahead, 3 sources, large. Do Gyeong raised his hand. Stop. Everyone froze. Do Gyeong listened. Footsteps, heavy, slow, not orcs, something else. Something he hadn't encountered yet. A creature emerged from the darkness of the corridor. Tall, 2.5 meters, thin, gray skin covered in cracks from which a dim orange light seeped, an elongated face, eyes like coals, horns on its head, 2, curved backward, long arms, fingers like branches, an ash demon. The memory of the former body spewed out a torrent of information, an ashen demon. The highest-ranking monster of the depths, stronger than orcs, stronger than golems, smarter, faster, fire within. It can unleash a wave of heat 3 meters wide. Its skin is harder than steel. It has no weak spots. An average squad of 10 overseers loses half its number when it clashes with a single demon. Do Gyeong froze. The demon stood 15 meters away, staring at them. It didn't move. It didn't attack. It just stood there and watched. Its eyes, like embers, flickered. Behind it, 2 more emerged from the darkness. Smaller, thinner, younger, 3 of them. Against 4 humans, 1 orc and 1 worm. Do Gyeong counted. Quickly. Un against 1 demon. He might hold out. Not win, but hold out. A minute, 2. Nam Seo-yeon and Park Tae-woo were useless in direct combat against such a creature. Do Gyeong himself, with just a knife, against a creature with skin harder than steel. Pointless. Run. The passage behind him, narrow. The demons won't be able to squeeze through if we retreat. Do Gyeong didn't retreat. He did what he always did. He looked at the ceiling, then at the walls, then at the floor. The ceiling here is different. Not slate, basalt, hard, stable. You can't make it collapse. The walls are smooth, no protrusions. The floor is even, no pits, no cracks, nothing he can use. Except for one thing. Water. He could hear it. To the left, behind the wall, not a stream, a torrent, powerful. It's pounding against the rock on the other side. If the wall is thin, Do Gyeong looked at Un. The wall on the left, hit it. Un looked at the wall, then at the demons, then at the wall. He understood. He stepped toward the wall and punched it. The stone cracked. He punched it again. The crack widened. The demon in front flinched. He tilted his head as if listening. Then he stepped forward. Da-yong shouted. Un, 1 more. Un struck a 3rd time. The wall burst open. Water gushed out. Not a trickle. A torrent. Icy. Murky. With enough force to knock Un off his feet. The water flooded the floor in seconds. Knee-deep. Waist-deep. The demon stopped. An orange light flickered in the cracks of its skin. A wisp of smoke rose from its feet. Water and fire. Demons didn't like water. The heat in their bodies was sapped by the cold. Not fatal, but painful, unpleasant, weakening. The first demon hissed. It took a step back. The 2 younger ones turned and disappeared into the darkness. The first one remained standing. It stared at Do Gyeong through the stream of water. Its coal-black eyes glowed dimmer. Do Gyeong stood waist-deep in the icy water and stared back. 10 seconds. 20. The demon turned and walked away. Slowly. He didn't run. He walked away, like a creature that had decided it wasn't worth it today. Do Gyeong exhaled. His legs were numb. The water was freezing. Nam Seo-yeon stood on a ledge by the wall, dry up to her chest, wet below. Park Tae-woo hung from the wall, clinging to a crack. Woon was getting up off the floor, soaked to the bone. Angry, the water kept flowing, but the pressure had eased. Do Gyeong looked around. The stream had found its course. It flowed down the hallway toward the far end. The water level was dropping, knee-deep, ankle-deep. 5 minutes later, all that remained on the floor was a puddle, and a hole in the wall from which water was seeping. A constant source. Do Gyeong looked at the hole and thought, if he widened it, it would become a waterfall. If he channeled it through a gutter, it would supply water to the entire 2nd level. Then he thought of something else. He had just discovered the weakness of the ash demons. Cold water, the heat fades, their speed drops, their coordination deteriorates. It doesn't kill them, but it weakens them enough to land a blow. He committed this to memory, not on the wall but in his head, alongside the blueprints and plans. They moved on, cautiously wet, freezing but alive. An hour later, they found white moss, exactly as Sue had described. The hunt took 3 days of preparation. Do Gyeong was in no hurry. He was never in a hurry when there was time to calculate. The first day was spent securing a water supply. Taegon and 22 dug a second channel from the underground stream on the first level to the opening leading to the second. Water began to flow downward, not in a torrent, but as a trickle, a controlled trickle. Do Gyeong placed a stone dam at the channel's entrance. Close it, and the trickle turned into a puddle. Open it, and the stream would rush down through the corridors of the second level. A switch. A water switch in a stone shaft. The second day was spent on reconnaissance. Net crawled through the corridors of the second level and drew up a precise map of the young demon's territory. A cave, 20 meters in diameter, one entrance, high ceiling, stone floor, smooth. The demon sleeps in the center. It wakes up at the slightest sound or vibration. The corridor leading to the cave is long, 100 meters straight with no turns. Water will flow through it like down a gutter. Day 3, the hunt. Do Gyeong went down alone. Not quite alone, unweighted above at the opening. Nam Seo-yeon stood by the sluice gate. She would open the water at a signal. The signal was simple, 2 strikes, with a stone against the wall. Nit crawled alongside Do Gyeong along the wall, a living sensor. Do Gyeong walked down the second-level corridor. In his right hand was a knife, a steel one, a gift from Kwan. In his left, a torch, a homemade one, a rag on a stick, soaked in oil from an underground spring that Nit had found. It burned dimly, but it burned. The air here was warm. The demon was close. 80 meters to the cave, Do Gyeong stopped. He placed the torch in a crevice in the wall. He stood still. He breathed, he thought. Why was he killing this demon? The system requires intent, not panic, not survival, intention. Why does he need a copy demon? Warmth. 130 people freeze every night. The stone walls draw heat from their bodies. People sleep curled up. Children turn blue from the cold. A single ash demon can warm an entire cave. Not with fire. Just by being there. His body radiates heat like a furnace. Put him in the corner of the sleeping quarters, and the temperature will rise by 10 degrees. People will sleep in warmth. The children will stop turning blue. This isn't a luxury. It's survival. Do Gyeong knew why he was killing. He walked further, 50 meters, 30, 20. The air became hot. Sweat trickled down his back. The walls glowed faintly orange. The demon's afterglow, 10 meters. Do Gyeong stopped at the cave entrance. He looked inside. The demon was sleeping, curled up in the center of the cave like a huge skinny cat. The heat changed everything. Not the strategy, not the tactics, the people. A person who sleeps in the warmth wakes up a different person. He doesn't spend the first hour trying to stop shivering. He gets up and gets to work. Do Gyeong knew this. He'd seen it in the field when a taut, heated tent transformed a frozen platoon back into a combat unit. It was the same here. People became faster, more precise, calmer. They stopped arguing over spots by the fire. They stopped hoarding food. They stopped waking up in the middle of the night from the cold, with bloodshot eyes and anger toward everyone around them. In 2 weeks, Do Gyeong had retrofitted all 3 sleeping quarters. Ho alone couldn't keep everyone warm. There were 140 people by then. More heat was needed. Do Gyeong found a solution. Stone pipes. Taegon carved channels in the floor from Block 3 to Blocks 1 and 2. Ho stood in Block 3. His body heat warmed the stone walls. Hot air flowed through the channels, heating the floor and neighboring blocks. Not as intensely as the demon's direct presence, but enough to prevent the stone beneath their backs from sucking the life out of the sleepers. Ondal, a warm floor, literally. Do Gyeong stood over the finished system and felt something strange, not pride. Recognition. He had done this before, somewhere, sometime. A heating system made from whatever was at hand. Different materials, a different life, the same task. He shook his head and went to work. The second month brought yet another change. People began to specialize, not on Do Gyeong's orders, on their own. Tagon became not just a mason but an architect. He drew blueprints for new rooms. Crooked, imprecise, but blueprints nonetheless. Choi Min-soo, the cook, experimented with mushrooms. He found a way to ferment them in stone pots with mineral water. After a week, the result was a sour masa. It wasn't tasty, but it was nutritious and kept twice as long. Nam Seo-yeon organized a duty roster that functioned without her supervision. 5 posts, a 3-shift schedule. Every person on duty knew what to do and who to call. Park Tae-woo, the rock climber, became the chief guide between the tiers. He found 2 more passages to the second tier, wider than the first. One of them was suitable for orcs and humans. The humans were changing too. The boy who had stolen bread was now collecting crystals faster than anyone else, not out of fear, out of habit. His hands had memorized the stone. His eyes had learned to spot the blue glint in the rock. The former carpenter repaired all the support beams on the first level and began making furniture, rough, stone with wooden inlays, but with cots that had headrests, shelves for belongings. A table in the kitchen. A former soldier became an instructor. He taught the new arrivals the basics. How to hold a pickaxe, how to install support beams, how to identify a dangerous section of the ceiling by the sound it makes. He would tap the stone with the handle and listen. A dull sound meant it was solid. A ringing sound meant a cavity. A cracking sound meant run, until Gyeong watched this and saw what he wanted to see. A system. Not a crowd of frightened people, but a functioning mechanism. Every screw in its place, every gear turning, not perfectly, with a creak, with misalignments, but turning. In the 5th week, the first death occurred in Ondal, an old man. The very same one from the first cell. The one who had sat against the wall with empty eyes on the first night. He had lived 35 days, twice as long as the average. He died quietly at night in his sleep. Sua said it was his heart, worn out, old. It couldn't take it anymore. Not an illness, not a wound, just time. Do Gyeong stood over the body that morning and looked at it. The old man's face was peaceful for the first time ever. He died in warmth, well-fed, unbeaten, on a stone cot rather than on the bare floor. It was better than most in the depths could ever hope for. Do Gyeong turned to the others. What was his name? Silence. No one knew. The old man never said his name. He never spoke at all. He simply was. He worked when he could. He ate. He slept. He remained silent. Do Gyeong looked at his tag, number 7398. He took off the tag, turned it over in his hands. Then he walked over to the wall in the main cave. He took out some chalk and wrote 7398, day 1, day 35, Ondal. Then he drew a line and said, "This is the wall of remembrance. Everyone who dies here will be recorded by name, if we know it, by number, if we don't. No one leaves nameless." The people stood and watched. Then Ho Jun, the former courier, with a healing leg, approached. 10 days! Do Gyeong divided them into 3 phases. 3 days for reconnaissance, 4 for preparation, 3 for verification. Phase 1. Reconnaissance. Night crawled through all the corridors from the camp to the hoist. 110 meters. The main tunnel, 4 side branches. 2 of them were dead ends, 2 were through passages. The elevator was at the end of the main tunnel. The only entrance was from above. A platform in front of the elevator, 15 meters across, an open space. Beyond it, a corridor leading to the camp. Gyeong had walked the route 3 times. He felt the walls. He tapped the ceiling. He listened for echoes. He counted his steps. He counted the turns. He counted the rocks. On the 2nd day, he found what he was looking for. 3 points. The first, a side tunnel 40 meters from the elevator. It's a through. It opens into a parallel tunnel. Through it, they can get behind the enemy's lines. Second, the ceiling above the tunnel, 60 meters from the hoist. The beams have rotted. The rock is loose. 1 blow from Un and the ceiling will collapse. It'll block the passage. Completely, not fatally. Just a wall. a stone barrier between the inspection point and the camp. Third, a narrow spot in the tunnel. 80 meters from the hoist, the walls converge to a width of 1.5 meters. Two people can't pass side by side, an ideal defensive position. One orc, and that's it. Do Gyeong returned to camp and drew up a plan, not a battle plan, a plan for a performance. Phase 2, preparation. He called a meeting. Do Gyeong, Nam Seo Yon, Sus E Daegon, Cha Min Su, Park Tae-woo. The 6 of them stood by the wall with the map. The inspection team would arrive in 7 days. 23 people, well-armed, trained. We won't fight them. Nam Seo Yon raised an eyebrow. We won't. Do Gyeong shook his head. No, we'll talk to them. She folded her arms. They won't come to talk. Do Gyeong nodded. Oh, I know. That's why we'll make sure they have no other choice. He began to explain. The elevator lowers the inspection team to the first level. They step out onto the platform. And they see nothing, an empty tunnel, darkness, silence, no people, no monsters, no camp. They walk down the tunnel. Torches, swords at the ready, tense nerves. 40 meters ahead, a side tunnel. They check it out, empty, they keep going. 60 meters ahead, the ceiling looks dangerous. The beams are rotten. The rock is cracking. They pick up the pace. They're on edge. 80 meters ahead, a narrow passage. They regroup. They line up in single file. They squeeze through. And beyond the narrow passage, they see a light. Green, mushroom-like, faint. They emerge into a cave, and they see it, a table, set, with bowls, with hot soup, with bread made from fermented mushrooms, flat, stiff, but bread, and standing next to the table is a single person, in a clean robe, unarmed, holding a bowl. Do Gyeong? Nam So-yeon looked at him for a long time. You want to feed them? Do Gyeong nodded. I want to show them that we're not a threat. We're a resource. Threats are destroyed. Resources are used. If they see a camp where people are working and crystals are being mined more efficiently than up above, it'll be easier for them to leave us alone than to destroy us. Sua took a long drag on her pipe. And if they decide to destroy us anyway? Do Gyeong pointed to the map. That spot on the ceiling, 60 meters from the elevator. Then Un will bring the ceiling crashing down behind them, and they'll be trapped between the rubble and us, with no way back, with orcs in the side tunnels, with a golem behind the rocks, and with a demon deep down, without food or water, in the dark. Do Gyeong looked at each of them. I don't want that. But if we have to, they'll sit here and stay here until they agree to our terms. Taegon snorted. A siege in reverse. Do Gyeong nodded. Exactly. The preparations took 4 days. Day 1, a cave for the meeting. Do Gyeong chose a small cavity behind a narrow passage, clean, dry. 22 and 41 carved a table out of stone, smooth, long, seating 25. Cha Min-su began cooking. The best soup, the best mushrooms, fish, fermented root vegetables they'd found in the distant tunnels. Everything they had. The people sewed a tablecloth from the fabric Kwan had brought, rough, gray, but a tablecloth nonetheless. Day 2, deployment. Do Gyeong positioned the orcs and spears at their designated points. One was in a side tunnel, ready to bring the ceiling crashing down on command, bomb, and 3 wild orcs in a parallel tunnel, ready to flank from the rear. 22 and 41 behind, rocks 100 meters from the meeting cave. Ho is deep inside, far away, but if needed, he can get there in a minute. Nit is in the wall, monitoring vibrations, reporting. Day 3, rehearsal. Do Gyeong walked the inspection route from the lift to the meeting cave. Timed it, 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, the table must be set. The soup is hot. Everyone is in position. He ran through the scenario 3 times, faster each time. Day 4, check. Do Gyeong checked every point, every orc, every replica, every ambush post, every escape route. Everything was working. Or maybe not everything, but he made the most of what he had. Phase 3, waiting. 3 days. Do Gyeong waited. Life in the camp went on as usual. People worked, ate, slept. Su-ah tended to the wounded. Cha Min-su cooked. Taegon built, but everyone knew. Everyone was waiting. The tension hung in the air, like moisture. On the second day of waiting, Ho-jun approached Do Gyeong, a former courier. His leg had healed completely. "Commander, if they come, we'll fight." Do Gyeong looked at him. "No, we'll feed them soup." Ho-jun blinked. Then he smiled. Then he left. On the third day of waiting, Nit twitched. The display flashed. Unit 003. Nit data. Vibration elevator. 25 sources. Descent. Do Young stood up. "They're here!" Everything sprang into action. Namseo Yon whistled. The men took their positions. Quiet. Quick. A month of training hadn't been in vain. Cha Min-soo stoked the fire under the cauldron. The soup had been prepared in advance. It just needed to be reheated. 22 and 41 took up their positions. Un took his place in the side passage, his hand on the rock, ready to strike, waiting for the signal. Do Gyeong removed the knife from his belt. He placed it on the cot. He put on a clean robe, the only clean one in the camp, washed and dried, especially for this day. He took a bowl. He went to the meeting cave. He stood at the table. He waited. 20 minutes passed. Footsteps, torches, voices, echoes down the tunnel. They were coming. 23 pairs of boots on the rock, a measured stride. The Imperial Guard, trained, disciplined, armed to the teeth. Yehung could hear them pass by the side tunnel. They didn't notice Un. He heard them pick up speed under the rotten beams. He heard them regroup in the narrow passage. Curses. One bumped into the wall with his shoulder. Another stumbled. In armor and with swords, navigating a passage just 1.5 meters wide is no walk in the park. Then light. Their torches. Orange. Bright. The first soldier emerged from the narrow passage and froze. He saw the cave. He saw a table. He saw a man in a clean robe holding a bowl. The second one emerged. The third. An officer, a different uniform, a gray cloak with gold braid, a young face, about 30 years old, sharp, cold, eyes like blades. He looked at the table, at the soup in the bowls, at the bread, at the tablecloth, at Do Gyeong. Everyone had come out, 23 men in the cave, swords in their hands, shields on their backs, torches blackened the ceiling with smoke. The officer stepped forward. Number 7742. Do Gyeong bowed. Briefly, in a military manner. Shin Do Gyeong, former lieutenant of the 4th Border Cohort. "Welcome to Andal. Please sit down. The soup is hot." The officer didn't sit down. He stood and watched. His men stood as well, hands on their swords, tense, wariness in their eyes. But there was something else. They were sniffing. The soup smells good. Hot soup with fish and mushrooms in a place that reeks of stone and dampness. That's more powerful than any argument. The officer was silent for 30 seconds. Then he spoke. "I've been informed that on the first level, a prisoner has organized a mutiny, that he's seized the level's resources, enslaved the monsters, and is building an underground fortress." Do Gyeong shook his head. "Not a mutiny, labor organization. He didn't seize it. He gathered what was unclaimed. He didn't enslave them. He hired them. And it's not a fortress, a camp, with a kitchen, with an infirmary, with a latrine. If you want, I'll show you." The officer stared at him for a long time. Do Gyeong didn't look away. He knew this moment would decide everything. If the officer sat down, a conversation would begin. If he didn't sit down, something else would happen. And Do Gyeong would signal Unu, and the ceiling behind the inspection room would collapse, and they'd all end up in a stone bag. The officer looked at the chair, unusual, with a cushion made of rolled-up fabric, then at the soup, at the steam rising from the bowl. Then he sat down. 22 soldiers exhaled in unison. Do Gyeong poured him some soup from the cauldron, himself, with a ladle from a stone bowl. The officer took a spoon, a wooden one, carved from a beam. He tasted it. His expression didn't change. But he tasted it again, then once more. 5 minutes later, all 23 were sitting at the table and eating. In silence. Do Gyeong sat across from the officer and waited. The officer finished his soup. He set down the bowl. He looked at Do Gyeong. "Show me." Do Gyeong stood up. "I'll show you." He led them around the camp for 2 hours. He showed them everything: the sleeping quarters, the kitchen, the infirmary, the storage room, the heating system, the water trough, the map on the wall, The Wall of Remembrance. 2 months, Do Gyeong divided the work into 4 phases. Phase 1, developing the second tier. Park Tae-woo widened the main passage between the levels in a week. Taegon in 22 carved steps into the stone, gentle, wide. An orc could pass, a golem could squeeze through. People carrying stretchers wouldn't get stuck. A staircase with 112 steps. Taegon counted each one. On the last step, he carved a notch and said he'd never built a staircase in his life as big as this one, and that he'd had enough. 2 days later, he began building a second staircase leading to the third passage. On the second level, Do Gyeong followed a tried-and-true plan: reconnaissance, clearing, and settlement. Knit crawled through all the corridors and returned with a complete map. The second level was 3 times larger than the first. 52 tunnels, 19 caves, 7 water sources, and the demons 5 remaining from the first hunt, 2 large ones and 3 medium-sized ones. Do Gyeong didn't hunt them all. He killed 2 of the medium-sized ones, one at a time. The same method every time. Water, cold, weakening, a knife strike to the soft spot between the horns. Every time, he knew why. The first one to heat the living quarters on the second level. He named it Ho the Second. The second one was for the blacksmith's shop. Do Gyeong had conceived the idea for the blacksmith's shop back in the 3rd week. He found a former blacksmith's apprentice among the prisoners named Song Jae-hyuk. The young man was 22. His hands bore old burn scars. His eyes were knowing. Convicted of setting fire to his master's workshop. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. The master beat his apprentices. Song Jae-hyuk endured it for 3 years. Then he couldn't take it anymore. Do Gyeong looked at his hands and asked one thing. "Do you know how to work with metal?" Song Jae-hyuk nodded. Do Gyeong gave him a task. Build a forge. Materials. Stone. Clay from the lower tunnels. Iron from the scraps of old tools and anvils. A bellows made from a leather bag sewn from the hides of cave rats. Fire from a demon. A demon clone of Ho the Third stood in the corner of the forge and on command breathed heat onto the stone furnace. The temperature inside the furnace rose so high that the iron turned red within a minute. Not ideal. A real blacksmith's furnace with coal and bellows would have produced more heat, but it was enough for a start. Sun Jae-hyuk forged his first knife in 4 days, rough, uneven, but sharp, made of steel from the remelted scrap of a pickaxe. Do Gyeong picked up the knife. He turned it over in his hands. The balance was off. The blade was a bit thick, but it cut. Good. Make 20 more like that, and 10 spearheads, and 4 axes. Song Jae-hyuk looked at him as if he were crazy. Then he nodded and went back to work. The forge changed everything. Not about weapons. Weapons were important, but not the main thing. Tools, real ones, steel ones, pickaxes with proper blades, chisels made of hardened steel, wedges, staples, hinges, hooks. Taegon got the tools he'd been dreaming of since day one. And he got to work. In 3 weeks, he carved out a system of rooms on the second level. 7 living caves, 2 workshops, a storage room, a second infirmary, and a bathhouse. Do Gyeong gave him a blueprint. A stone pool 3 by 4 meters, waist deep. Hot water was piped in from an underground spring. Wastewater was drained into a drainage tunnel. Taegon spent 12 days building the bathhouse. When he finished, Do Gyeong turned on the hot water. The pool filled in an hour. Steam rose to the ceiling. The stone heated up. The cave became hot and humid, just like a real bathhouse. The first 2 were the women and children. Jong Mi-yeon went in with her daughter in her arms. She came out an hour later, clean, rosy-cheeked, with wet hair. Her daughter was asleep in her arms. Jong Mi-yeon stood at the entrance, holding the child, and didn't move. Nam Seo-yeon approached her. "What's wrong?" Jong Mi-yeon shook her head. "Nothing. It's just, she's warm. For the first time in her life, she's truly warm." Nam Seo-yeon turned away. Quickly, Do Gyeong saw them from a distance. He didn't approach. He wrote on the wall, "Bathhouse, open, phase 2, people." In 2 months, Ondol's population had grown to 208 people. They came from all sides of the first tier, then from the second. Rumors spread faster than people. They serve hot food there. There's a bathhouse there. They provide medical care there. They don't beat you there. Even orcs work there, and you don't need to be afraid of them. Do Gyeong welcomed every newcomer personally. He recorded their name, token number, and profession, if any, as well as their health status based on Sua's assessment. He assigned them to their tasks. Those who could work went straight to work. Those who were sick went to the infirmary. Those who were too weak were assigned light tasks, gathering mushrooms, tending the mushroom farm, and sorting crystals. Among the newcomers were some valuable people. A former teacher named Cho Yeon-hwa, 50 years old, quiet, with dim eyes, convicted of distributing banned texts. He didn't say which ones exactly. Do Gyeong assigned him to teach the children. Yes, the children. By this point, there were 11 children in Ondol, aged 3 to 14, born in the mine or brought down with their parents. Cho Yeon-hwa was given a cave, a small one, dry, with a mushroom-like glow on the ceiling, and 11 pairs of eyes staring at him hungrily. Not for food, for words. He began teaching them to read. On the wall with chalk, letters, syllables, words. His daughter, Jeonmi-yeon, 3 years old, she learned to speak her first meaningful sentence right here, in a classroom at the bottom of the mine, under the glow of the mushrooms. Do Gyeong stood at the entrance and listened as 11 children's voices repeated the syllables after their teacher. Then he left, quickly. Phase 3. Krista. 200 per 10-day period, twice as much as before. Do Gyeong organized the mining operation as an industrial enterprise, 3 brigades, 20 people and 5 orcs in each. 8-hour shifts, not 12, not 16, 8. A person who works 8 hours and eats properly produces more than a person who works and is starving. That's simple math. The orc clones served as foremen. Un commanded the first crew, Bomb commanded the second, and the third was led by a wild orc, whom the men nicknamed Shadow because he moved silently for a creature weighing 300 kilograms. Shadow wasn't a clone, he was wild, free. He stayed because he wanted to. Do Gyeong respected that and didn't try to change him. The first 10 days yielded 170 crystals. Not enough. The second yielded 190. Closer. The third yielded 214. That's it. Do Gyeong placed the bag of crystals on the table in front of Kwon. Kwon counted them. He whistled. 214. You weren't joking. Do Gyeong never joked. The 4th stage. Contact with the lower levels. Nit discovered a passage to the 3rd level. Deeper, darker, hotter. The air there smelled of sulfur and burnt stone. The walls were covered with a black crust. No mushrooms grew. The only light came from crystals in the rock. Blue, cold. On the 3rd level lived creatures Do Gyeong had never encountered before. Stone worms. Not the blind reapers, but others. Larger, thicker, with armored skin. They didn't attack. They burrowed. Endlessly, pointlessly. They gnawed through tunnels and moved on. Behind them remained perfectly smooth passages, as if someone had run a drilling machine through them. Do Gyeong stood at the entrance to the 3rd level and looked at the tunnel gnawed by a worm. Smooth, 3 meters in diameter, sloping downward at a 15-degree angle. He thought, builder worms, living drilling machines. If we could get a copy like this, the expansion of Ondal would accelerate tenfold. New caves, new adits, new levels. All it would take is one worm, killed on purpose. Do Gyeong descended to the 3rd level with Un and Nam Seo-yeon. They found the worm an hour later. Huge, 5 meters long, 2 meters in girth, a shell like a turtle's, a blunt head, no eyes, no teeth, instead of a mouth, a stone plate that vibrated at such a frequency that the rock in front of it crumbled to dust. Sonic drilling. Do Gyeong stared at it, and the gears in his mind clicked into place. Ultrasound shatters rock, not mechanically, resonantly. This isn't an animal. It's a tool, created by someone, for a purpose. He killed the worm. It wasn't easy. The shell was impenetrable, but the worm had one weak spot, the joint between its body segments, a thin strip of soft tissue. Do Gyeong waited until the worm stretched out in the tunnel and stabbed the knife between the 3rd and 4th segments. Deep, all the way to the nerve trunk. The worm twitched, curled up, froze, aglow. The registry has been updated. Unit 014. Type, stone drill worm. Status, active, full obedience, awaiting assignment. Your name is Drill, because you're a drill. Simple names for simple tasks. Drill, I need a cave, this size, right here. Gyeong-na drew it on the wall. A circle, 50 meters in diameter, 10 meters high, smooth walls, smooth floor, a vaulted ceiling for strength. Burr looked at the drawing. He began to vibrate, and he crawled toward the wall. The stone began to crumble before him like sand. In 6 hours, Burr dug a cave that Taegon would have taken 3 months to dig. When Do Gyeong stepped inside, he stopped in the middle and stood there for a long time. Empty, huge, with smooth walls, with a level floor, with a high vaulted ceiling. It could hold 300 people, or a kitchen seating 100, or a workshop, or all of it at once. He stood there and saw not emptiness, but a plan. Walls with shelves, beds along the walls, fireplaces, tables, light, warmth, life. The ondol was heating up. In the 3rd month, Kang Jimin arrived. She didn't come on her own. They brought her in. Nam Seo-yeon and 3 guards caught her in a side tunnel on the 1st level. A woman in an overseer's uniform, half-blood, black hair with a red streak, northern blood, a narrow face, high cheekbones, gray eyes, cold, her hands were tied behind her back. She stood straight, didn't flinch. Nam Seo-yeon brought her to Do Gyeong, a spy, or a scout, found at the far entrance. She was walking alone, without a torch. She knew the way. Do Gyeong sat by the wall and looked at the captive. A sergeant's uniform, 3rd Guard Company insignia. Her boots are worn out, so she's been on her feet for a long time. Her eyes aren't frightened. They're angry. How? Do Gyeong raised his hand. Untie her. Nam Seo-yeon looked at him. Do Gyeong repeated himself. Untie her? They untied her. Kang Jimin rubbed her wrists. She looked at Do Gyeong, at the orcs behind him, at the people around her, at the golem in the corner, at the cave, at the water trough, at the kitchen, at the children running past her down the hallway on their way to school. She looked for a long time. Then she turned to Do Gyeong. Kang Jimin, sergeant of the 3rd Guard Company, sent by Captain Han So-jin's inspection team for preliminary reconnaissance. Do Gyeong nodded. Reconnaissance. What she was supposed to find out. She answered directly. How many people? How many monsters? The camp's layout, access routes, weak points in their defenses. For the report, Do Gyeong looked at her intently. You came alone, without a weapon, without a torch, into a mine that's dark and full of monsters. Alone. She didn't look away. I'm a supervisor. I've been walking these mines for 4 years. I don't need a torch. Do Gyeong believed her. Anyone who's been walking the depths for 4 years knows them like the back of their hand. He stood up. You've seen the camp. Report whatever you want, but first, eat. She narrowed her eyes. Why? Because you're hungry. I can tell by your cheekbones. When was the last time you ate? She was silent for 3 seconds. Yesterday morning. Do Gyeong nodded. Cha min su. A bowl. The cook brought the soup, hot, with fish. Kang Jimin took the bowl. She looked at the contents, she sniffed it, then she began to eat, silently, quickly, like a soldier. She finished. She set down the bowl. She looked at Do Gyeong. Good soup. Do Gyeong nodded. Our cook, 15 years in the army kitchen. She didn't smile, but something shifted in her eyes. She spent 3 days in the ondol. Do Gyeong didn't restrict her movements. Go wherever you want. Look at whatever you want. Ask whoever you want. Just don't touch the copies. They get nervous around strangers. She walked around. She looked. She asked questions. She saw Sue's infirmary. She saw Song Jae-hyuk's blacksmith shop. She saw Cho Yeon-hwa's school. She saw the bathhouse. She saw how 22 carefully carried stone blocks and set them more evenly than any mason. She saw how Un, the 2nd orc cook, chased a boy out of the kitchen who had stuck his fingers into the cauldron. The orc growled. The boy cackled. The orc growled louder. The boy ran away. The orc returned to the cauldron, muttering something in Orcish. Kang Jimin stood there watching, her expression that of someone looking at something that didn't fit into any category she knew. On the 3rd day, she went to see Do Gyeong. He was sitting against the wall, drawing a plan of the 3rd level. I have to go, Do Gyeong nodded. You know the way. She stood there. She didn't leave. I have to go and report. Do Gyeong didn't look up. Report? She paused. What am I supposed to report? Do Gyeong looked at her. The truth? How many people? 215? How many monsters? 14 copies and 26 wild ones. Layout. 3 levels. Weak spots. She fell silent. Weak spots. Do Gyeong stood up. You want to know our weak spots. Let's go. He led her to the wall of memory. 4 names, 4 notches. You, 7398, old man, first, num 7512, woman, lung disease, second month, park, 7601, man, tunnel collapse, accident, third month, SEO, 7789, 14-year-old boy, cave rat bite, blood infection. Su-ah didn't make it in time. Do Gyeong was standing in front of the wall. These are our weak spots. We're losing people, not to monsters, to disease, to accidents, because we have only 1 doctor for every 200 people and no antibiotics. Report this! Kang Jimin stared at the wall. For a long time. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. She stopped at the exit, without turning around. I won't report our weaknesses. Do Gyeong didn't answer. She left. 10 days later she returned, alone, without her uniform, in civilian clothes, with a bag on her back. In the bag were 5 rolls of fabric, 20 candles, 3 vials of medicine from a pharmacy in the capital, and a letter from Captain Hanso-jin. The inspection has been postponed indefinitely. The hall is stable. The level is under control. No questions. Do Gyeong read the letter? He looked at Kang Jimin. She was standing with the sack on her shoulder, upright, proud, with gray eyes that held something new, something resolute. I quit. Do Gyeong raised an eyebrow. As a guard, she nodded. For 4 years, I've watched people die here. For 4 years, I believed this was the way things were supposed to be. That this is how the empire works. That the strong are on top and the weak are at the bottom, and that it's right. She looked at the cave, at the people, at the orcs, at the children. For the first time here, I see an order that doesn't stink. Do Gyeong looked at her for 5 seconds. Then he held out his hand. Welcome to Ondal. I need a head of security, if you can handle it. She shook his hand, firmly. I'll manage. From that day on, Kang Jimin took charge of security. And everything changed. Nam Seo-yeon had been a good foreman, but Kang Jimin was a warden. She knew the depths, knew every tunnel, every dead end, every patrol route from above. She knew when the caravans with food. She knew the overseers' shift schedules. She knew which of them could be bribed and which couldn't. In 2 weeks, she reorganized the guard post system. Instead of 5, there were now 12. An outer ring. An inner ring? Guards on duty at key intersections. A signaling system using stone strikes on a pipe. 1 strike meant all was quiet. 2 meant alarm. 3 meant danger. 4 meant evacuation. She drove the guards like recruits. She yelled. She drilled them. She made them run through the tunnels in the dark. She made them determine direction by the echo. She made them count their steps to the nearest shelter. People grumbled, but they obeyed. Because Kang Jimin was the kind of person people listened to, not out of fear, out of the understanding that she knew more. Do Gyeong watched this and saw what he was missing. A commander on the ground. He was a strategist. She was a tactician. He drew maps. She ran across them. A perfect division of labor. One evening, she approached him after her rounds, tired, her boots caked in mud, her hair disheveled, a strand of red sticking out. I need a uniform. Do Gyeong looked at her. What kind? A normal one? Mine. Not an imperial one. Mine. An Ondal one. Do Gyeong thought for a moment. Then he nodded. He waited 2 days. Then he asked Song Jae-huk to forge the fasteners. He asked the women in the sewing workshop organized by Jeon Mi-yeon to sew a uniform. Gray fabric, straight cut, red thread over the heart, like everyone else in Ondal, but with 2 insignia, an imperial knot on the right shoulder, a northern rune on the left. Do Gyeong didn't know what Kang Jimin's mother's rune looked like. He asked. She drew it on the wall. Silently, Do Gyeong memorized it. He gave the pattern to the seamstresses. When the uniform was ready, Do Gyeong laid it on her cot. Without a word, without ceremony, she found it that evening, unfolded it. Saw the patches. Right shoulder, left shoulder. She stood there, holding the uniform in her hands, for a long time. Then she put it on, buttoned it up, or ran her hands over the fabric. She looked at her right shoulder. She looked at her left. She walked out of the sleeping quarters and through the main cave. Everyone saw her. No one said a word. There was no need. She walked straight ahead, proudly. For the first time in her life, she wasn't choosing between the 2 halves of herself. She wore that uniform every day, until the very end. In the 4th month, Park Yuri arrived, or rather, she fell. just like Do Gyeong once had. The cage snapped off its cable and crashed onto the first level. Of the 9 people inside, 4 survived. One of them was a young woman in a torn, academic-style dress, 22 years old, thin to the point of transparency. Her eyes were enormous. Her hands were shaking. Her hair was tangled, but the marks on her fingers were from ink, not a pickaxe. She wasn't a prisoner. She was a fugitive. Su-ah examined her in the infirmary. 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, dehydration, exhaustion. But she was alive. When she regained consciousness, the first thing she said was, "Crystals, they're not stones, they're not stones." Do Gyeong was sitting next to her. "What?" She grabbed his hand. Her fingers were ice cold, her grip was desperate. "Monocrystals, I know what they are. I studied at the Crystal Seal Academy, 3 years. Top student. I was granted access to the archives, the restricted ones, and I found out crystals aren't minerals. They're compressed suffering, human suffering. Every crystal is pain, concentrated, crystallized. The mines don't extract fuel. The mines squeeze suffering out of prisoners, and it freezes into stone. The more pain, the brighter the crystal. The more deaths, the greater the yield. The entire empire runs on this. All the heat in the capital, all the weapons, all the streetlight streets, everything on human pain." Do Gyeong sat and listened. Park Yuri's hand on his wrist trembled. He didn't pull away. His expression didn't change. But inside, something clicked into place. A click, like the final piece of a puzzle. The crystals are warm. He'd wondered about this during the first week. Why is the stone warm? Now he had the answer. Because it isn't a stone. It's frozen human pain. And it still remembers the warmth of a living body. Do Gyeong withdrew his hand. Gently. "You ran away from the academy." She nodded. "I found out the truth and couldn't keep quiet. I told my mentor. He reported it. I was arrested. Sentenced to the depths. That was 3 days ago." Do Gyeong nodded. "You're safe. No one will touch you here. Rest. Heal. We'll talk later." She fell asleep. For the first time in 3 days, Su-ah stood nearby, a pipe clenched between her teeth. If she's telling the truth? Do Gyeong looked at her. She's telling the truth. I knew it. Not like that. Not with words. But I could feel it. The crystals are pulsing, as if they were alive, because they are alive, or were. Su-ah took a long drag. Then we're trading in human suffering with the Empire. Do Gyeong was silent. Yes, for now, yes, but not forever. Park Yuri spent 2 weeks recovering. Then she started working. Not with her hands, with her mind. She was a theoretical mage, the Academy's top student. She knew how the Empire's crystal energy system worked. Every formula, every principle, every mechanism. And she knew the system was flawed. The energy of suffering is dirty, unstable. It requires constant renewal. The Empire depends on it like a drug addict depends on a fix. Every year, more crystals are needed. More prisoners, more suffering. A bottomless spiral. Until Do Gyeong gave her a task. Find an alternative, a clean source of energy, without people, without pain. She looked at him as if he were mad. An alternative to a system that had been built over 300 years. Do Gyeong nodded. You have hot underground springs, geothermal energy, temperature gradients, water flow. Think, she thought. For 2 months, she scribbled on the walls, she calculated, she argued with herself, she ate handfuls of sweet mushrooms. She was on edge. She cried at night when no one was watching, except for Su-ah, who saw everything. Do Gyeong came by every day. He looked at the formulas. He didn't understand the magical part. But he understood the engineering part. There's no cooling circuit here. There's excess pressure right here. You need a valve. This diagram won't work because the flow is unidirectional, but you need circulation. Park Yuri looked at him every time with the same expression, a mixture of irritation and amazement. You're not a mage, and how do you know? I don't need to be a mage. Pipes are pipes. Pressure is pressure. Energy is energy. The forms are different, but the principles are the same. They worked together, a mage and an engineer, theory and practice. And in the 3rd month of their collaboration, what they'd set out to achieve finally happened. Park Yuri assembled a device, a small one. made of stone and a copper tube from an old shed. It had a stone flask inside, which hot water from an underground spring circulated. The temperature difference between the hot spring and the cold stream created a current. The flow passed through a crystalline lattice that Yuri had grown from mineral deposits on the walls, and light emerged from the lattice, pure, blue, bright, without pain, no suffering, no people, just the Earth's energy passing through the right structure. The flask glowed in Yuri's hands. She stood there, holding it. Her hands weren't shaking. For the first time in months, her hands weren't shaking. Do Gyeong stood beside her. He looked at the light, then at Yuri. Then he took her hand and placed it on the warm flask. You did this. With your own hands. Pure hands. She stood there, holding the flask. The light fell on her face, on the tears streaming down her cheeks. Quiet. Pure, like the light in the flask. Do Gyeong stepped back. He gave her a moment. Then he turned to Sua, who was standing in the infirmary doorway smoking a pipe. Sua looked at the flask, then at Yuri, then at Do Gyeong, then she took a drag and blew the smoke toward the ceiling. So, we've just abolished slavery? Do Gyeong shook his head. No, we've just proven that it isn't necessary. We'll abolish it later. At length. Loudly, with all the red tape. Sua choked up. By this point, Ondal numbered 4,000 people, 7 tiers, 600 spears, 3 schools, a hospital, a bathhouse, a blacksmith shop, a sewing workshop, a mushroom farm, a fish farm, a quarry, a library of stone tablets on which teacher Cho Yeon-hwa had carved texts from memory, and a temple without a god, just a cave with a high ceiling and a wall of remembrance. 23 names, 23 notches. Every morning, someone would come and place a bowl of food by the wall. Cha Min-soo made sure the bowl was full. The empire arrived in the 12th month, not an inspection. An army, 10,000 bayonets, 3 regiments of the Imperial Guard, 2 siege corps, 600 crystal seal mages. Grandmaster Myung-gi Hwan commanded in person, 60 years old, a face like dried parchment, eyes like 2 nails driven into his skull. He stood on the surface at the main entrance to the depths and looked down. Next to him stood Princess Hwangbo Chaerin, 19 years old, in a torn ball gown, with bruises on her wrists from ropes. The emperor had sent her as a message. Here is your princess. I threw her into the shaft. If you're so brave, then save her. A trap, obvious, crude. The magister knew that Do Gyeong couldn't leave a person in distress. That's his weakness. He saves people. He always saves them. Even when he shouldn't. The princess was dropped down on the second lift, alone, unarmed, without food. The cage hit the bottom, and the girl stepped out into the darkness. Upright, proud, with a split lip and cold eyes, ready to die with dignity. She didn't die. 3 minutes later, Un approached her, silently. He held out a hand as big as her head. She looked at the hand, then at the orc. Then she took his hand and followed him, to Ondal, where Do Gyeong met her at the entrance. He looked at her torn dress, at the bruises, at her cold eyes. Hwangbo Chaerin, the 3rd princess. She lifted her chin. Yes, Do Gyeong nodded. Cha Min-soo, a bowl and an apron. She blinked. An apron, canvas, gray, with her name embroidered in red thread. Cha Min-soo handed it to her, along with a bowl of hot soup. The princess stood with the apron in one hand and the bowl in the other. Her expression changed, slowly, layer by layer. Pride, confusion, bewilderment, and somewhere very deep beneath all those layers, something warm, quiet, alive. A month later, the princess was washing dishes in the communal kitchen. 2 months later, she was in charge of distributing supplies. 3 months later, she was speaking to people in the common language rather than the palace dialect. And for the first time in her life, she laughed heartily. But that came later. Right now, there was the army. 10,000 people looming overhead. In front of her, Gyeong was sitting at a map. Next to him were Nam Seo-yeon, Kang Jimin, Park Yuri, and Soo-ah. The 5 of them stood by the wall. 4,000 stood behind them. Kang Jimin was speaking. 3 regiments, 2 siege regiments, 600 mages. They'll block all the entrances, flood the lower levels with water, or poison the air, or just pile up the rubble and wait until we suffocate. Park Yuri turned pale. Sua was smoking. Nam Seo-yeon clutched her knife. Do Gyeong looked at the map, then he stood up. He walked over to the wall. He picked up a piece of chalk and began to draw not a defense plan, a plan for surrender, their surrender. 10,000 people who had come to a place they didn't know, through tunnels they hadn't seen, into the darkness that belonged to Ondal. Do Gyeong drew for 3 hours. Then he turned to his men. They wouldn't storm the place. They would descend carefully along the main tunnel in columns as required by the regulations. 3,000 in the lead, 3 in reserve, 4 at the top. They'll follow the tunnels of the first level. They'll see empty caves. We'll retreat to the lower levels. Everyone, with our belongings, with our people, with our copies, they'll follow us deeper and deeper and deeper, and in 3 days they'll realize one thing: there's no food here, no water, no light, nothing. We took everything we had with us, and they'll be standing in the darkness 1,000 meters underground with 3 days' worth of supplies and no map. Kong Ji-min looked at him. And then Do Gyeong pointed to the map. 17 narrow passages along the route from the surface to the 5th level. Each one can be collapsed. Each one turns the tunnel into a stone bottleneck. We won't kill them. We'll seal them in like wine in a bottle, and then I'll go out and offer them some tea. Sua took a long drag. Tea? Do Gyeong nodded. Real tea. Hot. With honey. Kang Ji-min had supplied us with a package through Kwan last week. Sua looked at Kang Ji-min. She shrugged. The plan worked for 4 days. On the first day, the army came down. 3,000 soldiers along the main tunnel. Torches, swords, magic lanterns. They walked and found empty caves, warm, with traces of life, sleeping platforms, fire pits, drawings on the walls, children's drawings, chalk scribbles, a sun these children had never seen. The soldiers looked at the drawings and said nothing. On the second day, they descended deeper. The second level, the third, darker, tighter. The air was heavier. The torches dimmed. The magic lanterns flickered. The mages grew nervous. Supplies were running out. On the third day, the ceiling collapsed behind them. 7 points at once. 7 stone plugs, 7 orcs on Un's command, struck the 7 walls. 7 sections of the ceiling collapsed. The army found itself trapped in a stone sack. No way back. No food, no water. In the darkness. 3,000 people. On the 4th day, Do Gyeong came out to them. Alone, unarmed, carrying a tray. On the tray was a teapot clay, steaming hot, and 2 cups, along with honey in a stone bowl. He walked through the narrow passageway he had left open. He stepped into the cave where 3,000 hungry, angry, and frightened soldiers were sitting. He set the tray down on a rock. He poured 2 cups. He took one for himself. He placed the second one across from him, and he sat down. Master Myung-ki Hwan found him an hour later. The old man made his way through the crowd of his soldiers. The magi parted. The officers stood up. The master reached Do Gyeong. He looked at the tea. He looked at the man in the miner's overalls. He sat down across from him. He picked up a cup. He took a sip. Good tea. Do Gyeong nodded. The master set the cup down. Do you understand, Lieutenant, that if we free everyone in the mines, the power grid will collapse? The capital will freeze. 1 million city dwellers will die this winter. Are you prepared to take responsibility for that? Do Gyeong pulled the flask out of his coat pocket. That very one. The one with the blue light. He set it on the stone next to the teapot. Pure energy. No people. No pain. A geothermal source combined with a crystal lattice. The power per unit volume is 30% higher than that of a mana crystal. 0 production cost. An eternal fuel source. A station can be built in half a year. 10 stations in 2 years. That would be enough for the entire capital and the 3 nearest provinces. The magister stared at the flask for a long time. Then he picked it up, turned it over in his hands, looked at the light, set it down, picked up a cup. He finished his tea, set it down. He was silent for 3 minutes. So, I've been using the wrong formula for 300 years. De Gyeong didn't answer. The master stood up. He pulled his seal from his belt, a golden one bearing the crest of the crystal seal, and placed it on the stone. My people are hungry. De Gyeong nodded. Cha Min-su is already preparing it for 3,000 servings. The master looked at him. Then he turned and walked back to his men. An hour later, 3,000 soldiers were eating mushroom soup with fish while sitting in a cave on the 5th level, in silence, with spoons from stone bowls. Orcs sat next to them. Golems stood along the walls. The demon hoe glowed with a warm light in the corner. The soldiers ate and looked at the demon. The demon looked at the soldiers. No one raised a sword. The soup was hot. A winter morning, on the surface, the first in 2 years. Do Gyeong stood at the exit of the main shaft and squinted. Light, real, sunlight, white. So bright it brought tears to his eyes. He hadn't seen the sun in 732 days. He'd counted every single one, with notches on the wall in his room. A small, stone room, with a cot, a table, a map on the wall, and a glass of cave mint on the shelf. 732 days underground. Now he was standing above ground, in a clean miner's overalls, without insignia, without a weapon, with a wooden seal in his pocket. Snow lay all around him. White, soft, real. Do Gyeong bent down and scooped up a handful. Cold, wet. He held the snow in his palm and watched it melt. Then he straightened up and looked ahead. Before him stood a delegation. The Imperial Chancellor, representatives of the 12 provinces in fur cloaks, envoys from the northern tribes in wolf pelts, 24 officials, scribes with parchments, and soldiers, but not with swords at the ready, a guard of honor, flags, coats of arms, a ceremony. 6 months of negotiations had led to this day, 6 months after Magister Mayung Gi-hwan returned to the surface and reported the truth to the emperor. The crystals are suffering. An alternative exists. The underground city is real. It's impossible to destroy it without losing the army. Emperor Huangbo Jin raged for 2 weeks. Then he quieted down. Then he began to calculate. He was a despot, but not a fool. The numbers spoke for themselves. Destroying Ondol would mean losing 3 regiments and all crystal production for years to come. To admit defeat meant losing face but preserving the economy, at least for now, until the transition to clean energy. Trade began 4 months after the army's retreat. At first it was clandestine. Quan brought fabric and tools down. Ondal sent crystals and blueprints back up. Do Gyeong's blueprints, schematics for water wheels, ventilation systems, heating ducts, geothermal pumps, things that made the capital's engineers tear their hair out because they were simpler and more efficient than anything they'd come up with in 300 years. By the 5th month, the trade had gone public. Moon Hae-in, 25 years old, the daughter of a furrier in the capital. She appeared when Do Gyeong went to the capital incognito for the first time. Wearing a miner's smock with dirt under his fingernails, he walked into the Moon family's shop to buy fur for his winter gear. She was standing behind the counter, practical, businesslike, with eyes that assessed a customer faster than he could open his mouth. Do Gyeong held out a sketch of a double-lined fur vest. She looked at the sketch, then at him, then back at the sketch. It's a design with an air pocket between the layers. How do you know about that principle? From the mine. She narrowed her eyes. From the mine, where the floors are warm, and orcs work, and a demon keeps the children warm. You're Shin Do Gyeong. Do Gyeong looked at her. She smiled. Your blueprints have been circulating around the capital for a month now. Every craftsman in the guild has seen the water wheel diagram. My father says it's genius, but impossible. I say nothing is impossible if someone has already built it. Do Gyeong looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he held out his hand. I need a sales representative. Upstairs. Someone who knows how to count money and isn't afraid to count it out loud. She shook his hand firmly. Businesslike, without a word. Do Gyeong made her a seal. A business card seal. Wooden. Or with an inscription. Ondal Trading House. Head Moon Ha-in. No references to her father, no family crest, just her name. She held the seal in her hands longer than necessary. Then she tucked it into her bodice, and she got to work. In 2 months, she built a trading network that supplied Ondal with everything they couldn't produce underground. Paint, paper, spices, seeds, medicines, fabrics, metal. In exchange, they received crystals and blueprints. The blueprints were valued higher. Now, the ceremony, Do Gyeong stood in the snow and waited. Behind him, people emerged from the mine, one by one, in pairs, Sue with a pipe, in a pristine white lab coat sewn for her by the women of Ondal. Her eyes were calm, her hands in her pockets. She stood to Do Gyeong's right, Kang Jimin, in his uniform, gray, red thread, 2 shoulders, 2 worlds, 1 woman. She stood to his left, Park Yuri, in an academic-style dress, but a different one. Clean, new, with a flask of blue light on her belt like a talisman. Her hands do not tremble. Her eyes are clear. She stood behind Sua, Huangbo Chiren, in a simple gray ondol dress, with a red thread near her heart. Without a crown, without a title, with her apron rolled up in her pocket because she never parts with it. She stood behind Kang Jimin, Moon Hyein, in a business suit of the capital's cut, with the trading house seal on her belt, with a notepad in her hand because she was always keeping track. Even now, she stood at the back, and the last one emerged from the darkness of the shaft, small, thin, long hair the color of wet coal, eyes in which something very ancient sometimes flickered, in the one who had been sitting at the very bottom, 300 years, alone, forgotten, nameless, until Gyeong found her on the lowest level, in a cave that wasn't a cave, but a cage, a stone cage, sealed, with runes that had faded with time. He stood before the seals and looked. Then he called Yuri. She read the runes. She turned pale. This wasn't a prison for a monster. It was a prison for a builder, for a creator, for the one who was here before the empire. They broke the seals. Inside sat a woman, small, quiet, with eyes that had seen more than a single glance could bear. She didn't remember her name, didn't remember who she was. She only remembered that they had locked her up and forgotten her. Do Gyeong knelt before her. He looked into her eyes for a long time. Then he said, "Your name is In. It means reason, because everything must have a reason, and they took that away from you." She remained silent for a minute, 2, then she reached out and took his little finger. And she never let go. In. The last of a race that did not wage war but built. A race that turned enemies into allies through labor. The registry system. The ability to copy. None of this was imperial magic or a divine gift. It was her cry in a dream. Sleeping at the bottom of the mine, she sensed a man who was dying to save another. She sensed an engineer, and she reached out. Through the fabric of worlds, the only time in 300 years, Do Gyeong was her final call. She didn't know he was an engineer. She was lucky, or unlucky, or perhaps her really did sense such things. Now she was standing in the snow, small, thin, holding Do Gyeong's little finger, and squinting at the sun she hadn't seen in 300 years. Behind them, people were emerging from the mine. The first row, Ondol, 10 people, Taeyeon, Chamin-soo, Nam Seo-yeon, Hojun, Park Tae-woo, Song Jae-hyuk, Jung Mi-yeon, carrying her daughter in her arms, Cho Yeon-hwa, Kwon, and the boy who stole the bread. No longer a boy, a young man, with broad shoulders and calm eyes. Behind them were 10 orcs. Un was first. Behind Un were 10 golems, 22. Behind the golems were 10 demons. Ho, all wearing identical gray jackets with a red thread over the heart. Humans and non-humans, workers and soldiers, former enemies, current allies, a single line, 1 ondol. The chancellor unfurled the scroll. He began to read. His voice was steady. Official. The empire recognizes the autonomous province of Ondol under the administration of Governor Shin Do Gyeong, with the right to self-governance, the judiciary, trade, defense, with the obligation to supply clean energy to the imperial grid for 3 years, with the right to release all prisoners of the depths, all of them, without exception. The chancellor finished. He held out the governor's jade seal, green, carved, bearing the imperial coat of arms, weighty with tradition. Do Gyeong looked at it, then he took his own out of his pocket, a wooden one, carved by Un in a single night, with a crookedly burned inscription, Ondol, warmth for all. He placed both seals on the document, the jade one next to the wooden one. 2 seals, 2 worlds, 1 piece of paper. Then he straightened up. He turned toward the mine. Down there in the warm Ondol halls, 4,000 people and 600 copies were waiting. Tables were being set. Soup was being served. Chamin-soo left his deputy by the cauldrons and went upstairs, but the kitchen ran smoothly even without him. It ran smoothly because everyone knew their job. Because Un II stood by the cauldron and growled at anyone who dared to salt the soup without asking. Because 22 carried firewood. Because Ho heated the walls. Because the system worked. Not because someone was standing there with a whip, but because every cog knew its place. Do Gyeong looked at his people, at the delegation, at the snow, at the sky, which was gray and low and promised a blizzard. Then he spoke, softly, so that only those standing nearby could hear. Well then, comrades, the shift is over. Let's go home. The soup's getting cold. He turned and walked back into the mine. Sua followed him. Kang Jimin, Yuri, Che-rin, Hei-in, holding his little finger. Then Taigon, Cha Min-su, Nam Seo-yeon. Everyone, one by one, they headed back down, into the warmth, into the light of the lamps and lanterns, into the smell of hot soup, into the clang of hammers and the grind of stone, into the voices of children learning the alphabet, to the grumbling of the orc cook, to the poems that 22 carved onto slate slabs with his gnarled stone fingers, to the house, which they had built themselves, out of stone and darkness and rusty iron and the stubbornness of a single engineer. The Chancellor stood in the snow and watched them leave. The last to turn was Un, a 400-kilogram orc in a gray jacket with a red thread over his heart. He looked at the Chancellor, nodded, politely, like one colleague to another, and walked down. The mine entrance gaped in the snow. Warm air rose from it, steam, and the distant scent of hot soup, ondal, warmth for everyone.